Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, Wonderful Fanfics, back with the amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Luffy Ace Sabo rescued by Whitebeard pirates. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. The ship had stolen one of their nurses, and the Whitebeards did not take kindly to their own being stolen. Not at all. This wasn't their full force, although any more trouble and Whitebeard might change his mind about the hold order for the Moby. Instead, he had sent a couple of his commanders and their carefully selected division members. The thing with these types of situations was, they were messy. The networks for slave traders were extensive, and if you weren't careful, backup could be called on an invaded ship, and in turn the backup could call backup, and so on. All in all, the situation called for a certain level of efficiency, ruthlessness, and experience that came with being a commander or long-time crew member, which was what led to 5 commanders and 27 crewmates invading the ship. The nurse's name was Rose. She was a shy girl, still learning the world of medicine, but she was sweet and Oyaji had taken a shine to her. She had a wonderful bedside manner and was apparently the only nurse who could convince their captain to stop drinking, even if it was only for a night. So of course, they were pissed. And yes, they would be getting her back. They attacked at midnight. By that time, the ship's lights were mostly dark and it appeared that most of the crew had gone to bed. The ship, a massive transport vessel, was anchored a couple hours offshore of some backwater island, about 3 days' sail away from reaching its intended destination at Sabo, where their human cargo could be sold and bartered like livestock. It was disgusting, but this ship would never make it there. Not if they had anything to do with it. The team invaded silently, Marco in the lead as they climbed up from their boat, hidden in the shadow of the much larger boat that dwarfed theirs several times over. Marco was the first to step foot on deck. He dealt with the night guard quickly, silencing him before he even knew they were there. He summoned the others up after that, each of the group crossing the railing to come stand on the deck besides him. None of them were smiling. What was there to smile about? We get in, we get her, and then we get out and burn this whole thing to the ground. Marco reminded his crewmates, meeting each one of their eyes. Bring all of their captives with us. I do not want us to overlook a single innocent. We never do. Fossa had been smoking, as he always was, but now he flicked the cigar overboard, blowing the last puff of smoke through his nose. His face was serious. All of theirs were. This was dark stuff. I know, he admitted, turning back around. Let's go. The ship was odd. There had been a slight nagging feeling of wrongness on the deck, but it grew stronger and stronger the further Marco went. By the time he hit the bottom levels, it was impossible to ignore the feeling. The problem wasn't how inhuman ships such as these were. No, they knew that already. Still horrifying, but they had known that already. No, the problem came with how the ship was run. There are rules for these things, universal between pirates, marines, and even cargo ships like these. To function, ships needed a certain amount of around-the-clock work. They needed night watches, night patrols, night prep cooks, a shift guard. Sure, there was the occasional guard, one on the deck, one in the watchtower, and a single one asleep in the main hallway. But other than that, the hallways were deserted. No one was at the wheel, and instead a rope had been tied in order to keep it on course. It was all very odd. But Marco didn't have long to reminisce on the odd way this ship was run before they were discovered. The silence of the night was shattered in a second as the alarm was tripped. It was the insistent ringing of the emergency bell that was so loud it shook the frame of the ship itself. Light soon flooded the hallways, and somewhere on one of the floors above, Marco heard the stamping of footsteps as the first responders rushed to the scene. Not good. He had hoped they could avoid this. These types of things ran smoother when the alarm wasn't tripped. Backup would be called. There was nothing he could do about that other than hope it was far enough away that it wouldn't reach them in time. Somebody on the crew had messed up, and Marco knew it wasn't him. One of the newer members most likely. It was no matter. Mistakes were inevitable. He sprinted down the stairway, hitting one of the lower levels of the ship. There was a guard here. That's how he knew he had gotten the right floor. The man was standing in the middle of the hall, confused by the alarm but not smart enough to be alert. His eyes widened when he saw Marco, and his hands fumbled with his gun. But he was too slow, far too slow. Marco shoved him against the wall, his head hitting the wood with a loud crash as the man slumped over. It was always the weak ones, wasn't it, who thought they had the right to control other people, to lord over them like a farmer to livestock. How ignorant. Marco snatched his keys as he stepped over the man, unlocking the door to the prison cells. And that was when he realized something was seriously wrong here. The overwhelming stench of death hit him, and he had to cover his nose with his sleeve to stop himself from turning away. Something horrible had happened here. The hallway was lined with cells on either side, each of them cruelly small. But oddly enough, the first cell was empty, as was the second and third and fourth. In fact, all the cells he searched were empty, except there were clear signs people had been living in them. Blankets and food scraps. So where were they? Marco got his answer down the next hallway. The only cell still inhabited by prisoners was the last one. That was where he found his lost crewmate. Although he had been too slow, she lay on the floor, cushioned by thin blankets in a makeshift bed. She looked so peaceful. Her golden hair had been arranged around her like a halo, and her left hand lay over her stomach, as if she were simply having a peaceful rest here on the floor of this horrible place. Her face soft and content. Her other hand was preciously clasped by her soulmate, the only other inhabitant of the entire floor. It was a boy, a dirty boy whose face was covered by bruises and dirt. Even his fingers were a horrible purple shade as they tangled with her pale ones. He was watching her, or rather watching over her as she rested. He would be watching for a while. No, Marco breathed as he felt the hurt shoot through his chest like the blow of a sword. The boy looked up sharply, unaware of the man's presence. He pressed backwards but didn't let go of her hand. No, Rose. Marco put a hand to his mouth as he grabbed the bars. She looked angelic. Her face and hands had been cleaned carefully, mercifully, but Marco could see the purple bruises on her cheek, and worst of all, her chest wasn't rising. When, he said, not tearing his eyes away from her. A few hours ago. I'm not really sure. The boy's voice was quiet as he looked back down at her. God, a few hours. If only they had been quicker. If only they realized sooner. If only they had watched her better. The guilt swirled around his head as he reached for the keys, unlocking the door. The boy watching him the entire time, but Marco hardly noticed, unable to look away from his friend on the floor. You were her friend. Marco nodded numbly as he knelt down beside her, brushing her cheek with his knuckles. She was cold. He had spoken those words out loud without realizing it. Not until the boy beside him moved a little bit. Here, he said softly, offering Marco the hand he had been holding. He took it, feeling the warmth of her fingers, kept warm by the hands of this child this entire time. Marco felt appreciation, the type he could never be able to express as he clasped her pale hand between his own. He gently kissed her knuckles in a goodbye, and for a moment he could imagine she felt it. We failed you, he told her as he let go, putting her hand over the other, arranging them on her stomach. But we will bring you home. You don't have to stay here anymore. He could feel the boy's eyes watching him the entire time, too closely for Marco to give her a real goodbye. That would have to wait for later. When she was back on the ship surrounded by family and friends, they would take care of her, give her a proper send-off, and they would all mourn her. You did this? Marco asked finally. The boy was silent for a moment before he spoke, turning away from Marco to look down at her as well. She deserved better. I couldn't save her, so I did what I could for her. You were holding her hand. All this time, he just shrugged. She asked me to hold it. She didn't want to be lonely at the end. I didn't want to let go. It was the least I could do for her. I wish I could have done more. Marco turned to him. He really was young, wasn't he? Thank you, he told the boy, for looking after my friend when we couldn't. Blue eyes met his own. She believed you would come. She said her friends were coming. He told him. I know she did. I wish I could have. No, he insisted gently. Even right at the end she knew you would come for her. So she wasn't scared. She knew she wouldn't get to say goodbye. She knew you would come get her. So she was happy. That was just so like Rose, wasn't it? Marco turned away, keeping his emotions under the surface. He reached out, tucking a stray wisp of her hair behind her ear. What's your name? He asked. When the boy didn't say anything, he began. I'm Marco. You're a pirate. Marco nodded. There was usually a certain amount of fear from people when he admitted it to them, but if this boy felt it, it didn't show on his face. She wanted her mother to know. I will tell her, Marco promised. Someone on the crew would inform her. Sabo, the kid said after a moment. My name is Sabo. Sabo, can you tell me what happened to all the other people? Every cell is empty, but this ship is headed to port. Surely it wouldn't return without a full haul of cargo. It was full, the boy said. Then where are all the captives? They're dead. What? How? Was it sickness? Sometimes in conditions like these, diseases were known to break out, although usually there were more survivors. Not a sickness, the boy told him. A week or two ago the guards started to get rid of us. They threw half of the prisoners overboard, and the other half, Marco pressed. They died. The kid's voice sounded hollow. After they threw the others away, the guards started to attack the rest of us. The injuries got to them and they just drifted away. To reiterate what was going on in this place, why would a merchant ship turn on its merchandise? It was money in their eyes they were destroying, right before they reached the auction where they could cash in. Do you know why, Sabo? Something went wrong, the boy said after a moment. What? He just shrugged and Marco sighed, tucking the blankets tighter around his fallen friend. But you two survived. Longer than the others. We didn't break so easily. He rose to his feet slowly, stretching out the sore joints that came with sitting on the floor for hours at a time. That was their Rose. Are there any other survivors? The other's voice seemed to falter. I don't know. He forced out, and there was something so profoundly sad in his eyes. I don't know, he said again. Listen, Sabo, Marco said. If there are, we will find them. You're going to take her? He asked, moving his eyes back to the woman. Marco nodded. Thank you. and then the kid slammed into him with all the strength he had left. He pushed Marco's head against the wall, hard enough to hurt him if he were a normal person that was. By the time Marco realized he had taken the keys, the boy was gone. When the alarm had tripped, the captain initially didn't hear it. He was still quite drunk from the other night, as he always was, although he already knew what it was. One of the slaves had a habit of escaping. This would be the 7th time, although they never tried to get away. Rather, they seemed like they were searching the ship, starting at a different level each time, opening every door on their way through. They always got caught pretty quickly, and then consequently punished, yet they never seemed to learn. This would be the final time. He would make sure of it. As he rose, he pulled his kid from his bed. He was still asleep. Earlier he too had been acting out and had a stern talking to. It seemed like bad behavior was going around lately. It hurt his heart to tell him off, but it was his job, of course. Parents had to be strict. That was how children learned to obey. The kid was still asleep from earlier. The captain regretted their argument. His temper had gotten the better of him, but it just worried him when his kid acted out. What if he hurt himself? It was no good not to listen. Children should listen. Children should always listen. He picked the kid up, lifting him out of his bed. It was a cramped bed, that was for sure, and the kid constantly complained about how small it was. Children were always complaining. Lately he had little patience for it. He carried him across the room to place him in his own bed, as he often did in the early morning when he had to work. Boys needed independence if they were to grow up to be strong and brave. But on occasions such as these, when he had to leave to attend his duties in the early hours of the morning, he often placed his son in his bed, just in case he woke up and was scared of the noise. This way he would know the captain had it under control. Even if he wasn't here to reassure him in person, the child would know that he was safe and protected from the scary world out there. The only rule about this arrangement was he wasn't allowed to leave. The ship was big and he could get lost. There were so many scary people out there. So, the captain enforced the rule, because sometimes kids made accidents. He kissed his forehead before he left. "I'll protect you," he promised. After all, that was what fathers did for their sons, even if their kids hated them for it. It was Jozu's fault the alarm had tripped. Not directly, of course. He would never have made such a mistake. But as a division commander, the failings of his underlings reflected back on him. So he was fine shouldering the mistake himself. Rose's closest friend among them was a young man from Jozu's division. They probably shouldn't have let him come, but he had begged so much they caved, on the condition that he tagged along with Jozu. A guard had seen them and went to sound the alarm bell, but his friends had been eager to deal with him. Only he didn't do a complete job of it, and the guard had only been briefly stunned. While their back was turned, he had escaped down the next hallway where he flipped the alarm system, which in turn woke up every single crew member on the ship. Now it was a bit of a mess. They needed to act quickly. He sent his crewmate to double back to the ship as he continued forwards, searching some of the lower level. There was a bunch of crates, storage, water barrels, potatoes waiting to be peeled, and so on. He caught the faint sound of banging near one of the corners. When he pressed his head against the floor, it sounded like it was coming from below him. So Jozu followed the sound all the way to the hull where the banging was the loudest. It was eerie down here, with dim lighting and the smell of dankness. As the ship moved, the walls would creak and groan, but the noise was drowned out by the near-insistent banging. He pressed forwards until he hit a door at the end of the hallway. It was bolted shut and encased in steel, but it shuddered as whatever was inside beat down upon it. "Hello," he called, not receiving any response. Not that he totally expected one. It was probably some horrible sea monster they had dredged up, waiting to gnaw on the bones of man. Something so frightening they had to store it in here, away from the rest of the crew. He was tempted to walk away, but a larger part of him knew he had to open it. After all, that was why they were here. And now that it had his attention, he was damn curious. So Jozu undid the deadbolt and unlocked the door. It was pitch black inside. His eyes couldn't make out anything in the darkness. And then he heard a sound. The scrape of metal over metal as something rushed towards him. He took a step back, his arm automatically hardening by itself into diamond. Just in time, something came at him with an impressive strength as he put up his arm to block it. And rightfully so, as a metal pipe came into contact with the hardened surface of his skin. It snapped immediately, but the attacker didn't give up. No, it wasn't a monster after all, was it? Rather, the one who was attacking him was a kid. He had messy black hair and a wild look in his eyes as he came down upon his rescuer with a murderous intent. "Stop," Jozu said as he reached his other hand out, grabbing the boy's arm to pull him away to get a proper look at him. He was a dirty, skinny thing, but there were undeniable muscles in his arms. He snarled, showing his teeth, which were a bright white against his dirt-covered skin. He the shackles around his wrists and the collar around his neck. This boy was a slave, a violent one. "Hey, listen," he began. "I'm not them, kid. I hate them too. We'll take you with us, away from here." And that was when the kid bit him in the hand of his unshielded arm. Jozu let him go out of surprise. The teenager might not have been stronger, but he was faster, and as soon as Jozu let go of, he was out of there. running down the corridors at breakneck speed, leaving the man to chase after him. "Give him back, you bastards. Give him back or I'll kill you. Every single one of you. I swear. Give him back, give him back. Please, please give him back to me. You can't take him away from me. Don't take him away from me. He's all I have left. Please, he is all I have left." There was no answer from the dark hallway, and none of the guards even acknowledged him. By now they were used to this. He had been screaming for 3 straight days, but it didn't matter. They never brought his brother back, either of them. Sabo fell against the bars, bringing his knees to his chest. He had to bite back the tears that were starting to collect in the corner of his eyes. Ace wouldn't be crying right now if their positions were reversed. Ace never showed weakness, probably because he didn't have any. He never yielded to an opponent, even when they had him beat like right now. But Ace wasn't here right now, was he? And that was because he never gave in. So they took him, leaving Luffy and Sabo all alone here in this too-cold cell. Sabo had promised Ace he would look after their little brother while he was gone. He promised he would protect him, and he had, all on his own for nearly 2 months. He had taken responsibility for all of Luffy's punishments. He had taken on extra work, done extra tasks, and on occasional one-fights for entertainment, all to get extra food for his brother who had started to starve. And then 3 days ago he had taken him away. Sabo didn't know why or for what purpose, only that he was gone now, and he wasn't going to bring him back, no matter how much he screamed. And Luffy, who had been so brave through the whole thing, had started crying for Sabo as they took him away. He didn't even know if his brothers were still alive. He hoped they were. The guards told him that Luffy was, but the guards liked to lie. They forced Sabo to become their slave. They warned him that if he even thought about refusing an order, they would kill Luffy. So he did everything they asked. He took care of the other prisoners, played doctor to their unfixable injuries even though he had no idea what he was doing. For the first time in a long time, Sabo was truly and honestly alone. Things hadn't gotten better from there, had they? No, everything always had to get worse. Every single time in his life, when he thought he was honestly and truly screwed, things always got worse. What gods had Sabo pissed off? Was this just the penance he had to pay for being born with the diseased blue blood of the nobles? Then why was it always him? Not his parents who the bad things seemed to happen to. Why was this Ace and Luffy? But no, feeling sorry for himself would accomplish nothing. He could still fix things. He had to. Otherwise, Sabo thought of his friend Rose, the peaceful look on her face, and of all the people they had lost in the last few weeks, and he ran faster. It had been about 5 minutes since he had shoved the man into the wall. No one had come after him yet. That was good. He hoped the invading pirates would help draw attention away from him. He had done this before after all. But this time would be different than before. This time he had a distraction and the keys. He went to the kitchen first, digging through the knife drawer as he tucked one of the blades into his waistband. He knew this place like the back of his hand. One of the tasks he had been forced to do was prepare some of the prisoners' food. They had always thought it was a punishment. Little did they know he liked it. More than that, it was a godsend. He would always do his best to make the prisoners' food livable. And if he wasn't assigned to the kitchen, he wouldn't have been allowed to accidentally make an extra each time for the isolation cell block. Nobody else in their right mind brought food to the prisoners in isolation, which is why most of them had died months back. But he prayed, hoping against hope that not all had died, because nobody ever let him recover the plates. So he honestly didn't know, but he was about to find out. He took off again, heading towards the bottom of the ship. "Please, please, please be okay." He repeated the words endlessly as he ran. "Don't you dare leave us on our own here. Don't you dare leave me. You there." A shrill voice broke out. "Stop, slave." "Shit." Sabo paused as he heard the clicking of a gun behind him. "Arms up, don't move." One of the guards had been hiding in the side hallway. He had been so caught up in his own head he had overlooked them. He did as the man said, slowly raising his hands behind his head as the marching of boots came closer. He turned around when the man instructed to come face to face with the barrel of the gun. "Where are you going in such a hurry?" the man asked, and Sabo said nothing. "That's right, nowhere," he hissed as he pulled his handcuffs out. "Hands in front of you. No funny business." Sabo lowered his hands in front of him, his gaze never leaving the gun. The man snorted as he fumbled with the restraints one-handed. "At it again then," he mocked. "The captain is going to kill you this time. Said so last time. Doesn't want no more trouble from you." "Where is he?" Sabo growled. The man just laughed. "Give up already. He doesn't even know why." He never got the chance to finish the sentence. Sabo brought up his hands, the blade concealed in his sleeve, digging into the skin just below his collarbone. Before he could even think about screaming, he swiped the blade upwards and the man was silenced. Sabo worked quickly, dragging him back into the side hallway he had emerged from. He took the man's gun, wiping his blade against his pant legs before tucking them both into his waist. He took off again down the hallway, proceeding with more caution, although the desperation and fear ruled out his better judgment. There were few guards at the bottom levels of the ship and even less pirates. They were probably too preoccupied fighting one another. Sabo didn't know who to route for. Neither, he decided. Hopefully they both killed each other. No, that wasn't right. They were Rose's friends. She would want more for them. So maybe that meant Sabo had to as well. Even if they ended up turning on him though. He didn't like the idea of putting his fate in the hands of an invading pirate group, but he liked the slave traders even less. If he could just find his brothers, they could slip away. Then they would have to beg to no one for their lives. Their lives could be their own again. Sabo hung on to that thought as hard as he could as he entered the hull of the ship. This was where the isolation cell was. One of them at least. But he wouldn't bother with the others. He already knew those people had long since passed. Ace, he cried out now as he kicked a fallen crate out of his way. Rotten fruit spilled from it all over the floor, but Sabo ignored it. Ace, answer me. He cried again, listening for any sign his brother was alive. In the past, whenever Sabo could convince the guards to let him bring food to the isolation prisoners, back when there used to be more than one, they always accompanied him. And he was careful to keep the fact that he cared a secret. If they found out how desperate he was doing this out of love for his family, and not on a whim like he pretended, they would have put a stop to it long ago. The two of them never got a chance to talk, not with the guard watching him like a hawk. But he knew Ace knew it was him because every time he entered the room there would be a tapping. A light tapping, but he could hear it nonetheless. 3 taps and then a pause and another 2. When they were kids, they made a lot of enemies for themselves, and to feel safe they would put up all these traps and defense measures around their treehouse. They claimed it was for protection, and it was in part, but it was also just for fun. 3 boys living alone in the woods had to entertain themselves somehow, so they had made up a secret knock. 3 knocks followed by 2 meant things were okay. Ace was trying to tell him he was okay. Even though Sabo knew he was lying, he lived for that sound. The guard would always say he had gone insane, but Sabo knew better. But it had been a long while since Sabo had heard the tapping. Since things had gone to hell nearly 2 weeks ago, he hadn't been allowed to bring food anymore. Instead, the guards had kept him in the cell block, tending to all of the dying prisoners, one by one until only him and Rose remained. And Ace, he went hungry. 3 times in the last 12 days, Sabo had managed to bribe one of the guards to bring him food. But he swore to himself that he would never think about how he did that again. And there was no way of knowing if they had actually done it or not. The guards lied. Constantly. Sabo had been praying for the best, but part of him expected the worst. After everything that had happened, he honestly didn't know if he could handle finding Ace's body starved or beaten to death. He was preparing himself for horror, or to finally be reunited. But he did not expect neither to happen. When he arrived at the steel door, his brother wasn't there. The door had been left wide open, and Sabo's heart shuddered in his chest. Ace, he called again without a response. Please, please, he begged uselessly under his breath as he ripped a candle out of its holder, pushing into the room. It was pitch black inside. The point was to drive the prisoners crazy without any contact or even light. Sabo had already known that. They had heard horror stories about the isolation cells. After all these months here, he had never been inside until right now. And he hated it. It was cold and dark and lonely. There was a cot in the corner and no other furniture in the entire cell. Sabo looked there first. There was blood on it, as well as bloody bandages on the floor. That didn't make him feel better. He searched the floor, finding nothing but the occasional drops of dried blood and the shards of a broken plate that had been smashed against the wall. If Ace really wasn't here anymore, then where was he? With no clues and no hope, Sabo pushed his back against the wall as he slid down it, tears of frustration and fear prickling in his eyes as he sunk down to the floor. Keep it together. He had to keep it together like he had been doing this whole time. He owed them that at least. His hand closed around a shard of the plate, and for a moment he was confused how it had gotten all the way over here. And then he saw the drawing on the wall and understood. Ace had broken the plate so he could carve into the hard stone wall. There, in the corner, were 2 badly drawn figures. They were barely recognizable. Not surprising, as Ace had done this in the dark after all. But he must have gone over them hundreds of times with the plate shard for it to be that deeply grooved into the wall. The taller stick figure had a top hat while the smaller one was wearing a straw hat and had a scar under its eye. Ace had done the ribbon in dried blood. Super gruesome, but Sabo couldn't help but smile at that. He put his thumb over Luffy's face, feeling the indent of the stone under his fingers. I'm going to find you, he promised. Both of you. They had failed. Rose was dead. The mission was failed. But it didn't have to be for nothing. They would save every single innocent and burn the ship to ash. Thatch had met up with Marco. The moment he saw his friend's grim expression, he had known. They returned her to their ship, making sure she was safe before they went back to their mission. Marco had told him what the blonde slave had said. They had been too late, not only for Rose but for most of the others as well. They needed to find that boy and the other survivors and figure out what had happened for the crew to start killing their expensive cargo. And they needed to do it quickly, before reinforcements arrived. Thatch went after the captain, figuring that was the best way to get answers. By this time, the enemy ship was a mess of scattered guards fighting the pirates. Thatch had little doubt that his brothers and sisters wouldn't have the crew sorely beaten and gathered up within the hour. But the captain, he was his. He had gotten directions from the first guard who had tried to stop him. The captain's quarters were near the top of the ship, as far away from the slaves as you could get. They had done some digging after Rose disappeared. The captain was known to be a heartless man, as all of the slave traders were, but his reputation for cruelty exceeded him. Although Thatch had also heard he was good at what he did, so it made no sense why he would snap now of all times. Slaves were money to these people. Cruel or not, the more they delivered, the more they got paid. Losing an entire shipment like this, well, that was a mistake their employers would certainly not forgive. Not like they would make it there now, though. Thatch broke down the door to the captain's quarters. It was an impressive collection of rooms nicely furnished, the first of which was an office. Thatch heard the crunch beneath his foot as he passed the desk and crouched down to see what he had broken. There was a small collection of wooden army figures lined up beside the desk, like the kind a child would play with. His weight had snapped the arm off of the general. He frowned as he picked it up. A weird thing for a captain of a slave ship to be playing with. Surely, he hadn't brought his kids with him, right? He had brought his kid, or at least some kid, which, to be clear, was horrible parenting. When Thatch entered his bedroom, he found the kid whose toys were scattered across the floor of the office. A boy was asleep in the bed, peacefully snoring away. Apparently even monsters had children. Thatch froze when he saw him, a million things running through his mind. At the top of the list, shit. This complicated things. Unsure of what else to do, he crossed the room, shaking the kid's shoulder until he woke up, sleep in his eyes as he sat up. Thatch was quick to cover his mouth. Don't scream, he told him. I'm not going to hurt you. The kid nodded, and there was no fear on his face. So Thatch took his hand away, trusting him not to bring a swarm of guards upon them. He looked young, definitely still child age, not yet a teenager. His skin and clothes were clean of dirt, and he didn't look like he was starving. At least not right now. He was still quite small, and his skin was stretched tightly around his bones. His clothes were also much too large to be made for him. Instead, they looked like adult clothes altered to fit him. His hair was messy, and Sleep mused. I'm not going to hurt you, Thatch promised as he knelt beside him. "'Kay," the boy said. He didn't sound afraid. It was odd how normal he sounded. My name is Thatch. Hi, Thatch, the kid smiled, just a little bit, as he spoke. Whatcha doing? What was he doing? I was looking for the captain. This is his room, right? The boy nodded. Is he your dad? The kid's nose crinkled at the question like he didn't like the thought. He huffed a bit. I guess. You guess. What does that mean? When he didn't answer, Thatch tried again. What's your name, bud? He tilted his head curiously but didn't say anything. It's okay if you don't want to tell me. I will understand, Thatch promised. It's not that, the kid said. You're not supposed to. Maybe. I don't remember right now. That's okay, maybe later. No, I forgot. I think it starts with an S. And the pit was back in Thatch's stomach. Something was seriously wrong here if the captain's son didn't know his own name. Sam, Sal, Sock, Soup, Sleed, Sabo, Sim, Slim, Sid, Skate. He sounded out the names trying to find the right one. Maybe it doesn't have an S after all. How do you not know? Thatch asked in horror. I bet you forget things too. He defended. Yeah, sometimes I forget my friends' birthdays or lose my wallet. Never my own name. That seemed to offend the kid as he glared at Thatch, sticking his tongue at him. Jerk, he said. Okay, I'm sorry. Apparently, that was a sore spot. Kid, I'm sorry. You're right, I've done it from time to time. Really? Sure, can you tell me why you're here? Where is your dad? Don't know. He looked around, as if realizing his surroundings for the first time. Sometimes he puts me here. Why? Oh, I think it's like a message or something. What? Like he does it when he has to work? I don't really know. That's what he says. So I don't get scared or something when I wake up, which is stupid. Why would I get scared? Sometimes kids get scared when their parents leave, Thatch told him. It's totally normal. I don't get scared, the kid said. I just get bored and hungry. Can't you just go get food? I'm not allowed to leave, the kid said. And yet another red flag. If this wasn't a cry for horrible parenting, Thatch didn't know what was. Okay, that's it. We're going. You're coming with me, all right. We are going to find your dad. And Thatch would get his answers one way or another. The boy perked up at that. Really? I can come? Of course you can. By the way he was reacting, you would think he was never allowed to leave the room. Can you get me out of this then? The kid pulled the blanket aside, showing his right ankle. Red flag number 3. Oh, what the hell? Thatch hissed. He was going to break this man's face for sure. What possible reason could he have for chaining a child to a bed? You mean you actually can't leave? The kid nodded, shaking his ankle. It makes me sleepy. I can't break it. I've tried. It's okay, Thatch promised him as he felt the chain out. It was a new one. No weak points. Tied to the post of the bed securely. He tried a kink, finding it unbreakable. Possibly sea stone. This just got weirder and weirder. Why would your dad do this? The kid tilted his head, as he seemed to do when he was thinking hard. I think it's so I don't leave. I got that part. Why can't you leave? He says it's dangerous out there. that people would hurt me, so I had to stay here. But I think I tried to leave too many times, so he doesn't trust me. That's horrible, but you said I could come with you, right? He looked so excited about the prospect of leaving it hurt Thatch's heart. He smiled softly at him. You're covered in bruises. He hadn't seen it at first, but there was a huge purple bruise covering the kid's face, another one on his neck, bandages on his wrists and ankles, and no doubt more under his baggy clothes. Someone had been hurting him. That was the final red flag. This man was dead, no matter if he was a father or not. The kid looked down at himself. Oh, it's fine. I want to come with you, Kay. He smiled so brightly, showing his teeth. Thatch nodded. Yeah, let's get you out of here. 2 hours after invading the ship, the pirates had cornered and captured at least half the crew. It was hard to say how many had gotten away. They were either hiding or regrouping for a counterattack. It wouldn't matter. The pirates may be outnumbered, but they were sure as hell not outmatched. They would find the rest, including the captain, question them, and then sink this god-awful ship. Rose would have to wait just a little bit longer. We couldn't find any slaves still alive. Marco sighed to himself. This was a really dark day, wasn't it? There's one at least. He's young. I'm not sure how old, but he's still a kid. We need to find him before they do. To Marco, I found a boy in one of the storerooms. Jozu interrupted. I didn't get a good look, but he seemed young. Black hair, super dirty. Be careful if you see him. He's violent. Noted. Marco promised his friend. We'll find them, and any others we can. Marco turned to the group of captives in the next room. They were tied securely in the center. All of them looked up as Marco entered. Izo had been tasked, much to his displeasure, with watching him. You owe me, he told him. You're my favorite brother, Marco promised with a tense smile. I'm always your favorite when I do you favors. Marco turned to the men, the smile falling from his face as he looked down at the people who had killed Rose. I am going to ask you one more time, and then I am going to get angry. Which of your prisoners are still alive? Don't test me today, Marco warned. You don't want to see what I am capable of right now. No, please. One man cried out. Listen, we don't know. I think it's just that boy, the blonde one. Why him? I don't really know. It wasn't intentional. We didn't mean to keep him alive. He was like a monster or something. Tougher than the rest of them. That's the only reason. I swear. Then why would you kill your precious slaves right before you reached the auction? After you carried them all this way? I won't ask again. He added, the threat heavy in his tone. We don't know, all right. The man pleaded and the others nodded. Just spare us, please. It was the captain's order. Why? Are you deaf? The man cried, so fearful there were tears in his eyes. I told you we don't freaking know. We intercepted a message from HQ. I didn't hear it, but he freaked out. Said they were trying to screw us over. That we would screw them first. And that's when we started letting the slaves die. Wow, you guys really are monsters. Izo told them. No, the man cried in panic. It's just a job. You understand, right? If it wasn't us, it would just be someone else. It's money. You're pirates, you have to understand. We don't understand anything. Marco told him. We might be criminals, but there are some lines I would never cross. Not for all the money in the world. From what I saw, you guys kidnapped the kindest person in this world along with 2 children and tortured the rest of the helpless people in your care to death. Just because things weren't going your way. And still you have the audacity to try and beg for your lives. How do you think those people you killed felt? Did you show them mercy? The man was crying now. Tears of fear streaming down his face. No remorse in his eyes. Please, I have a family. So did she. Marco left, leaving Izo to watch the captives. He was determined to find that boy. He had been Rose's friend. He had stayed with her at the end, holding her hand long past the time most people would, doing what they couldn't. Marco owed him a great debt, and he would repay him, even if he wanted to be left alone. He continued his search, looking on the upper levels this time. He found another one of the crew, concealed away. This one armed with a gun, waiting to shoot an unsuspecting pirate in the back when they crossed paths. Wasn't he in for a surprise? Marco left him lying in the hallway. Hopefully his brothers would find him before he woke up and caused more problems for them. He made his way to the kitchen next, figuring that was the first place a half-starved slave would go. And he wasn't disappointed. At first glance there was nothing amiss. The kitchen looked as one should on a ship this large, a little disordered. But Marco saw the blood. It started in the hallway, leaving a trail all the way to the pantry, still fresh, and there was no path out. Was it Sabo? Hello? Marco called out, coming closer to the door. Is anyone there? He put his hand on the doorknob, opening it. The pantry was empty, and that's when he attacked. A growl ripped from the cabinet behind him as a boy threw open the door, charging straight for him. Marco cussed as he jumped back, narrowly avoiding the swipe of the kitchen blade the boy wielded. No, it wasn't Sabo. Although he was clever, he must have noticed the blood trail he was leaving and doubled back to hide in the pantry when he heard Marco coming. This boy looked to be about the same age, but his hair was pitch black and he was dirtier than Sabo had been. Both were obviously slaves, but this one looked like a demon. His skin and clothes were coated in soot and he was visibly injured. Marco held his hands out to him in placation. "It's okay. I'm not them," he promised. "I'm not going to hurt you." But the words fell on deaf ears. When he charged, Marco was ready. He caught the kid, grabbing the hand that held the blade while holding the kid against him. The move was meant to hold him back, not to harm him. "I won't hurt you," he promised. "We're just here for our friend." The kid snarled in anger, sounding like an injured animal as he twisted and writhed in Marco's grip. Marco sighed, tightening the hand that was on the boy's fingers, forcing him to drop the knife. It hit the floor with a clatter, and he kicked it away with his foot. "They held you captive?" he asked. "Come with us. We will take you away from here." "Get off," he hissed, desperately pushing against Marco's arm. "I don't need your help." "You're hurt," Marco told him. "Badly. That much was obvious." "I don't need anything from you people." "Kid, we're not them," Marco told him, and there was sympathy in his voice that seemed to set the kid off. "I don't need anything from anyone," he hissed. "Let me go or I will kill you." There would be no reasoning with him, it seemed. "Well, we can't leave you here. We are going to sink the ship." "Get off me," he snarled, still struggling. "I'm not going with you, damn it. You want to stay here, with the people who held you captive. Don't pretend to know what I want." The boy seethed. "I'm trying to help you," Marco told him, but that seemed to set the boy off even more. "I didn't ask for your help," he screamed. This one was interesting. Marco saw real fire in his eyes, like how they were going to let him drown with the rest of the crew. "Hey boss," one of his ship brothers called, as they knocked tentatively on the door of the kitchen. "I heard the sounds of a struggle. Everything okay?" He felt the boy tense in his arms, trying to pull away, but Marco held on tight. "Here," he called to his crewmates as James emerged. "Are you okay?" he asked, unsurely, looking from Marco to the teenager and then the blood on the floor. "Can you take him?" Marco asked. "I think he's injured." "You sure? He's a fighter." "You sure?" "I can do it," James promised, looking anxious. But Marco knew he was stronger than he gave him credit for. "Don't you dare," the kid hissed as he struggled harder, if that was even possible. Despite how worn down he must be, he was incredibly strong. Hopefully James could handle it. But as he carefully handed the struggling teenager over to the man, his eyes became desperate. "Don't. Please stop. What's here that is so important?" Marco asked him. To no one's surprise, the kid didn't answer. "We can help you," Marco told him seriously as James adjusted his grip on his arms, pushing them behind his back so he couldn't lash out. "You just need to talk to us." The kid spat blood onto his face. Marco sighed as he wiped it off with his sleeve. "Take him to the ship," he told his brother. "Make sure he can't get back out. And be careful with this one." The boy growled. He has murder in his eyes. In hindsight, he probably shouldn't have trusted someone else with him. But Marco figured James could handle it. He figured wrong. The three of them sat on a blanket in the middle of their cell. It was cold, damp, and dark. But apparently not even forced slavery could stop Luffy's infectious smile. He kept giggling despite Ace and Sabo constantly having to remind him to stay quiet. He was better during the day, which was a blessing. But right now all the guards were either in bed or asleep at their posts. The only people awake to hear him were the slaves in the other cells, and none of them were about to tell the happiest among them to shut it. Ace had picked up a small rock from the deck and brought it back to keep Luffy entertained. They used it to draw on the cement floor of their cell. It wasn't much, but it did pass the time. And Luffy had fun, which was why he kept laughing. It was like tic-tac-toe, but much more complicated. They had a lot of free time on their hands after all. "Here?" Ace asked him, and Luffy shook his head, a delighted smile on his face. "Here?" He pointed at the shakily drawn X on the floor, working his way down Luffy's line. "Nope. Here." He looked away, avoiding their eyes. "I dunno. I forget." Ace grinned at Sabo. "It's here." "For sure," he agreed. "Guys, it's not." Luffy tried. "Damn Lu, your poker face is too good," Sabo teased, and he stuck his tongue out, a gesture the other returned. "It's not that one, Ace, so don't pick at K." "Do it," Sabo encouraged. "I want to go to bed." "It feels too easy," Ace argued. "That's never stopped you before." "Don't do it," Luffy encouraged. "It's not that one. Honest, like I'm serious." "So it's not the third one?" Luffy shook his head. It is." His brother stared at him. I mean not, it's not." "It's not," he corrected, and Ace laughed. "Well, I guess I trust you. I mean, you wouldn't lie, right?" "Then which one is it?" "The first one. Guess I'm picking that one then." "There is no other option," Sabo agreed, as Ace pointed to the first X. "Yes." Luffy shot up like a spring, cheering all the while. Under where he had been sitting was 3 X's in his crappy handwriting. I won. I won." Luffy was overjoyed, like embarrassingly so. He ran around their tiny cell, jumping up and down. "Hey lady," he cheered, running to the bars. "Lady." Luffy let her sleep, Sabo said, quickly getting up. "Sorry about him." He apologized to the woman, laying in the adjacent cell. No, she said, sitting up. She reached a pale hand through the bars to pat his head, and Luffy beamed. "At least someone's having fun." "Good job, sweetie." "He didn't even win," Ace said. "He literally just won a round." He still lost, by a lot, by 17 points. Sabo said, waving goodnight at the woman as he came to sit down beside them. They watched Luffy do a cartwheel, and then a backbend before collapsing onto his back, exhausted from the extended effort under the influence of sea stone. This was the first point I ever got, Luffy told them, still smiling like he had won the world. I tricked you, he said happily. Yeah, I figured, Ace told him. Yay, because I just told you. Can I have a do-over? Ace asked. He was feeling less charitable after Luffy's extensive gloating. Most people wouldn't brag about winning a single point. Luffy was really a glass-half-full kind of guy. Let him have this, Sabo told him. Look how happy he is. And you beat me by 2 points, so you're still the winner. Good for me, Ace said. I bet I'll beat you next time. I'm sure of it, Luffy said happily. An embarrassing and crippling defeat yet again seemed to do nothing to dampen his spirit. I wish I had that much misplaced self-confidence. This time Luffy stuck his tongue out at Ace, who flicked him off in reply. Wow, winning's really gone to your head, hasn't it? Sabo said, and Luffy nodded. We can team up next time and beat him, yeah. Yeah, Luffy cheered as Ace wiped the scribble marks of their game away with his palm and a little spit. You can't team up if there are only 3 of us. How much of a team up do you think it is if Luffy can't get a point? Sabo pointed out. Yay, I guess that's fair. I can get all the points, he said proudly. Whatever you say. Ace yawned, stretching widely, and Sabo didn't miss the way he winced as he did so. Let's go to bed. Their cell was small, and there was nothing but a straw-filled mattress and a blanket for the 3 of them to share. But they had made do with worse. They pushed together in the corner, sleeping in a pile, just like they were back home in their sunny country, so close that Sabo could hear every breath of his brothers as they drifted off to sleep. The situation was bad, really bad. They had been here for almost 2 months, with no sign of things getting better. They had no plan, no idea what to do. Resourceful as they were still young, not yet ready to take an entire ship of slavers down with their hands cuffed behind their backs. But Sabo would think of something. He always did. Until then, they stuck close together and looked out for each other. It would be okay, as long as they stayed together. Nothing could break them if they were together. Ace, Benny, Cool, Duke, Ed, Frank, Guy, Huey. The kid was listing names relentlessly. He had been through the alphabet twice already and had yet to remember his own name. But he swore it was on the tip of his tongue. He was like a super happy kid. For whatever reason, the current situation didn't seem to bother him. He didn't care that a mystery man was trying to steal him, nor that he was chained to a bed, nor that his father beat him, or even that he couldn't remember his own name. Well, he was a bit defensive about the last one, but he didn't seem to think it was out of the ordinary. He was just excited about being let go. You don't know where the key is. If I did, I wouldn't need your help. Ike, Jim, King, L. The bottom desk drawer was locked. Thatch snapped it open easily, digging around the papers there. Hidden away at the bottom of the drawer was a small silver key. Thatch grabbed it triumphantly. It was only then that he realized the near-constant talking had faltered. Kid, he asked, coming back to the bedroom. The boy was standing on the bed, the cuff around his ankle fully visible, as was the thick chain that ran along it and a handful of bruises Thatch had initially missed. They should probably get him to a doctor sooner than later. No names start with L, the kid said simply, rocking back and forth on his feet. Yes, there are, Thatch argued. Lloyd, Luke, Liam, Leo. Thatch listed them off as he returned to the kid. Luffy. He jumped on the bed, up and down. I don't think that's a name. Thatch told him. It is too. It's my name. See, I knew I didn't forget. It's Luffy. Luffy. He cheered, hopping up and down. His legs gave out and he crashed onto the bed, still laughing. Take that. You're sure? Thatch asked, kneeling beside him. He nodded, sticking out his ankle so the man could unlock it. The key snapped into it, dropping the chain off, but the cuff stayed attached to his ankle. Thatch frowned, firmly testing it with his fingers. Was it really sea stone? Who would go through the trouble unless? Luffy, do you have a devil fruit power by any chance? I can't get this off. What's that? You know, a devil fruit. A fruit you eat and it gives you powers. Cool. Thatch helped him down from the bed, only for him to fall to the floor the moment his feet touched. Thatch cussed as he pulled him back up, bringing him to sit on the bed. Are you okay? The boy frowned, rotating his unbound ankle. I think it's broken. What? Thatch unwrapped the bandages that ran up the first half of his leg, starting at his toes and going nearly all the way to his knee. The skin was a deep purple black. It looked dislocated. What happened? How were you jumping around? Can you walk? Do you need me to carry you? I can do it. Determination was in his eyes, and Thatch had to give it to him. He was tough. I know you can. But if it gets to be too much, I can carry you all right. It's going to be a bit scary outside. There is lots of fighting and you might see something really bad. Want to hold my hand? His nose crinkled. No way, that's for babies. He tested the ankle again, a bit gentler, smiling when he stabilized himself. How old are you, Luffy? Thatch took him by the wrist, helping to off-put some of his weight. Apparently, that was acceptable as long as it wasn't his hand. Dunno. Thatch wanted to be surprised, but at this rate he had been expecting it. Something was seriously wrong with this kid. Brain damage. That would explain the absolute lack of fear. But he seemed lucid enough, kept up a conversation. How old are you? 34, Thatch told him. That's really cool that you know that off the top of your head. He swung their arms between them as Thatch led him from the bedroom into the office. Most people do. Thatch unlocked the door, peeking down the hallway. The way looked clear. He pulled Luffy along. If I tell you to cover your eyes, do it all right. "'Kay," he agreed easily, looking around in excitement. "Wow, it's so big out here. Hey, can we go exploring?" "Now's not the best time," Thatch told him. "Have you never seen the rest of the ship?" "I think I have. Just a while ago. I'm not supposed to leave. I get in trouble when I disobey him." "Your father?" Thatch asked. The kid nodded. "Is that what happened to your ankle?" He shrugged. "Maybe. He does that when he gets mad." "You don't know how your ankle broke." "Not this again. It's super weird, right? You're being mean." The kid tried to pull his hand away, but Thatch held on. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to upset you. I just want to understand what happened to you." "Nothing has happened to me. I'm just me. Just Luffy," Thatch said after a second, giving the other an apologetic smile. "Just Luffy," he agreed, swinging their arms back and forth again. Luffy screamed as two of his fingers were twisted back. Being made from rubber, he had never been made to feel this pain before. But now that he was trapped with a sea stone cuff on his ankle, there was nothing he could do as the guards broke both of the bones. He heard the snap before he actually felt it. And then it hit him all at once and he screamed. They released him and he fell to the floor, only vaguely aware of anything but the searing pain in his fingers. He didn't even bend. How disappointing. The guard kicked at Luffy's ribs, his heavy foot hitting an old bruise. Luffy curled into himself, trying to protect his side. "Of course not, idiot. He is wearing sea stone. Should we take it off? Boss will have our heads." The guard brought his boot down on Luffy's head, pushing him into the floor. And then, in an instant, the weight was gone. Ace had tackled the man to the side, pinning him against the floorboards as he began to punch him. The others were quick to respond, running over as they tried to pull him off their crewmate. But Ace held on, furiously beating the other man even as 3 pairs of hands tried to drag him away. "Ace," Luffy whined as he forced himself to a sitting position. He rose on unsteady legs, grabbing the shirt of the nearest man as he tried to pull him away. "Stop hurting him," Luffy said. But the guard just pushed him back to the floor. He hit his head with a smack, laying there dazed as the sounds of the fight drifted in and out of his head. And then Sabo was beside him, picking him up and holding him against his chest as he screamed at their brother. "Ace, stop. Stop it." Ace looked up. Blood splattered over the side of his face. His eyes locked on Sabo, holding Luffy, whose twisted fingers were curled protectively against his chest. And he stopped fighting. The man under him moved violently, hitting him across the face and knocking him to the floor. He kicked him in the stomach a few times for good measures before hauling him back to his feet. "Think you're tough, do you?" Ace growled at him, showing his bloodied teeth. "Take him to the room. 3rd time this week, huh? Going for the record." Ace just rolled his eyes. "Don't please," Sabo screamed. "I'll do anything." "Oh, shut up," the guard mocked him. "One more word out of any of you filthy slaves and I'll take that kid in your arms and throw him overboard. I swear to God I will do it." Both his brothers froze and Luffy felt Sabo's arms tighten around him. He didn't like the feeling in the room. It felt murderous. He narrowed his eyes at the guards, the words building on his tongue. But before he could say one thing to the monsters threatening his brothers, Sabo's hand covered his mouth. "We don't want that, do we?" he asked, coming over to stand in front of Sabo. "Well," he grabbed Sabo's jaw, forcing the other to look him in the eyes. Sabo met the man's gaze head on, fury burning in his eyes as he shook his head. "Say it," he threatened. No, he prompted. "No, sir." The man's face split into a smile as he raised his hand to Sabo's bruised cheek. "That's right. No, bastard," Luffy growled, his voice muffled by his brother's hand. But the man heard it all the same as he lowered his gaze to look at Luffy. "Oh, this one has guts, doesn't he?" the man said as Luffy glared up at him. "No, don't," Sabo began, but the man put up his finger, silencing him. "I believe I said no talking." "That goes for you too," he told Ace, who was struggling against the guards that held him. "You're awfully small to be mouthing out like that, don't you think?" the guard asked him. And Luffy growled in response. The things he would say if Sabo would only move his hand. But his brother did not let him go. Instead, he lowered Luffy until his feet touched the floor, pinning him against him with the steel-like grip over his mouth. "Sir," Sabo spoke, his voice low and respectful, nothing like his usual tone. When the man didn't immediately bark at him to shut up, he continued, "I apologize on my brother's behalf. Please forgive them." The man finally broke his gaze with Luffy to look up at him. "Is that so?" Sabo nodded. "Our little brother is slow." He tightened his hand as he said that, daring Luffy to try and correct him. "He is still young, and he doesn't understand yet, so we are protective of him." While he was talking, the man had brought his hand up again, pressing his palm into Sabo's cheek. Sabo continued, like he didn't even notice. How old is he? He just turned 12. 12, huh? He looked down at Luffy, who glared up at him. You're a good kid, aren't you? The man asked Sabo. I wouldn't know. He told him coldly. Too bad this one keeps getting you in trouble. I know you've been helping him do his work. He's still young. He will learn, Sabo said. So you're asking me for a favor then? Yes, and that's how you do it. Luffy felt the shift in the other's chest as Sabo held back a sigh. He leaned into the man's touch ever so slightly as he asked, Please, sir. Fine, the man conceded. But how's train that mutt next time or else? He dropped his hand, wiping the dirt away on his pant legs. You're filthy, he remarked, a fact the three of them were well aware of. Take the other away. NOO. Luffy and Sabo cried together as the guards began to drag Ace towards the doorway. No, please stop. I'll do anything, Sabo cried. Don't hurt him anymore, you might kill him. Look here, slave, the guard snapped. Rules have been broken. We've been disrespected. You asked your little brother to be forgiven for his mouth. I allowed it. Now you want your other brother to be forgiven as well. How will you three learn your lesson if no one gets punished? You can punish me. Sabo, no. Ace screamed once again, struggling against them. Don't you dare. Oh, but you didn't do anything wrong, did you? No, only the guilty are punished here. That was total bullshit, and everyone knew it. This man was enjoying the power trip he had over them. So either you let us deal with that one, or, Sabo asked shakily. Don't hurt Ace, you jerks. Luffy cried out, only to be roughly shushed by his brother. The man knelt down beside him and Luffy glared straight into his eyes. Or he goes free and you let go of this one so he can take his place in the punishment cell. The man patted Luffy's filthy hair like he was a misbehaving child. Sabo stammered, his hands holding Luffy so hard it hurt. Let go, the man encouraged, trying to pull his hand free. But Sabo held onto him like his life depended on it. Sabo, don't you dare. Ace screamed at him. He can't handle it. I can. I know, Sabo said softly, and Luffy looked up at him, confused what was going on. But he knew he had messed up and now his brother was going to pay for it. He shook his head desperately at Sabo, asking him not to let them do that to Ace. I'm so sorry, he told Ace. You've made your choice then. When Sabo didn't answer, the man turned to Ace, who was still being restrained by the guards. Tough luck for you, isn't it? Sounds like your brother doesn't love you quite as much as he likes the little runt. Even though he started all this, didn't he? Luffy's lip quivered. Hadn't he? He was the one who had insulted the man. That was why they had tried to break his fingers. And then he had screamed, bringing his brothers right to him. If he would have just stayed quiet, the men would have gotten bored and left eventually. But no, he had screamed because he was scared and in pain. He had wanted Ace and Sabo to come because he wanted them to save him. Like a weakling. Anything to say about this? The man asked Ace, unknowingly walking right into his brother's temper. Yay, Ace said, glaring daggers at him. This isn't Luffy's fault, so leave him alone. And if you ever touch either of them again, you creep, I will break off your hands and stuff them down your throat so you choke on them. Sabo's face was pale with fear as he stared horrified at the man, whose face was beet red. He looked ready to blow. Take him away. He screamed at the other guards and they hurried to do just that. He whirled around to the two of them, marching up to scream at them. I want you to listen to me closely, especially you, brat, he spat. I'll let you hold on to him for now. But know this, the second we reach the auction, I will make sure the three of you are separated. And stay that way for the rest of your lives, which you better hope are short. So take a good look at your big brother, kid, because soon you are never going to see either of them again, and there is going to be no one rushing to protect you then. It was the longest punishment yet. Ace was gone for an entire 2 weeks this time. He had been taken before, many times, but never longer than a week, and despite what Sabo said, Luffy knew it was all his fault. He had never hated himself before. He didn't like the feeling. But when they came back from a long day of ship work, to Ace sleeping on the floor of their cell, covered in injuries and grime, Luffy nearly cried with happiness. The second the guards unlocked the door, he was on his brother, hugging the hell out of him. I missed you, he said, his arms tight around the other's neck. Ace had been sleeping right before the Luffy attack, but now he sat up sleepily, hugging Luffy back. He would never admit it, but he was grateful for the affection. He had gotten nothing even remotely close to human affection for 14 days. Sabo dropped down to his knees in front of Ace, whose arms were full of Luffy. You look awful, he said. Thanks, Ace told him. I feel awesome. I'm sorry, Ace, he told him seriously. I should've. Save it for someone who gives a fuck outlook. Sabo smiled at him as Ace wrestled his hands free from Luffy, pulling the two of them into a hug. I missed you guys. Don't leave again, Sabo told him, resting his cheek on his shoulder. It was so boring without you, Luffy told him seriously. You can't play tic-tac-toes with only two people. Yeah, you can, Ace told him. They had made the rules after all. No, you can't, Luffy told him seriously. You can't, Sabo parroted, smiling at Ace. Whatever you guys say. Luffy fell asleep shortly after that, laying half on Ace and half on the floor as he sprawled out, as he did in his sleep, talking of food and drooling every so often. "You still up?" Ace whispered to his brother in the darkness of their cell. Of course, Sabo shifted a bit so he could see the outline of his brother's. "How are Luffy's fingers?" "Not good. They snapped 2 of the bones. I taped them up to try and get them to heal. He couldn't move them afterwards." "Can they be fixed?" "I hope so." Sabo sighed. "We were worried about you." "Yay, sorry. I think I royally pissed him off. I probably should have kept my mouth shut. But that creep was asking for it, and honestly that felt really good. No, I should apologize. I was supposed to be watching him." He wandered off and all this started. The 2 of them had an unspoken deal about Luffy. They knew him well enough to know that he was grossly unqualified for this type of cleaning work. He was doing his best. Like them, he wasn't ignorant of the stakes. But he wouldn't be Luffy if he was qualified. So he stayed with Sabo the entire day. And when he messed up or couldn't do a task well enough, the blonde would cover for him. That meant taking on all of his work and Luffy's as well. Oftentimes Luffy would only make a task worse. Like today, he had to polish every single plate, which he did. But he hadn't realized that his rag had gotten dirty, so by the end the plates looked worse than when he started, meaning Sabo had to polish all the cutlery on the entire ship, and then redo every single plate in addition to the glasses because one of the guards had caught him and said, "If you have time to do his job for him, then we didn't give you enough of your own, did we?" Not that Ace and Sabo were good at this type of thing either, but they were quicker learners than their little brother who was all kinds of ADHD. In exchange, Ace took every punishment that Luffy brought upon himself with the messes not even Sabo could cover for. Like the time he had been ordered to bring them more rum from the cellar and dropped it while he was carrying it back to them. Ace had lied and said he had done it, the same way he had broken the glasses the week before and accidentally thrown the laundry into the sea the week before because they weren't properly tied to the line. Needless to say, Luffy was a domestic workers' lawsuit waiting to happen. Luffy would always beg Ace not to and scream at the top of his lungs that it had been him. But before the guards could even listen, Ace would have a biting insult on his tongue, and who did it became irrelevant in the frenzy to beat Ace senseless. To anyone else in their situation, Luffy would be a liability. And yes, he kind of was. But he was their liability. After all, they had been cleaning up his messes and dealing with the shit he brought upon them since they were kids. They just did it naturally now. But they needed him as much as he needed their protection. After all, who else but Luffy would still be smiling and laughing after 2 months in this hellhole? He was like being around a ray of sunshine, long after the sun had gone out. "This isn't your fault." Ace's low voice brought him back to reality. "I know. I just wish you would take better care of yourself. If not for you, then for us." "I know," Ace told him. "But like it or not, I'm going to protect you too. After all, you're my little brothers," he added teasingly. "I don't remember agreeing to that," Sabo told him. "I think you should say it, just once." Ace teased him. "You will feel so much better. Get bent." "Thank you," Ace tried. "Go to hell for being such an asshole," Sabo finished for him. "A good older brother." "I'll say that when you start acting like it," Sabo advised. "Acting like what, Sabo?" He tried. "What will you be saying?" "Just to be clear, that I am your... I hate you." "Yeah, you do. Well, you would go to search an enemy ship and come back with a child." "Marco, meet Luffy." "And who do we have here?" Marco asked. "Slave?" "I don't think so," Thatch said. "He said he is the captain's son." Well, that complicated things. It was one thing to kill a lying, maniacal, torturous bastard who had it coming. It was another to do it in front of his child. "Do you have like a mom or someone we can take you to?" Marco asked him. "I don't think so," Luffy replied. "So what? You want to let the captain go just because he takes his kid to work with him?" "No," Thatch said. "Not when he breaks said child's ankle and chains him to the bed so he can't leave. The bruises, those are him as well." "It looks like it. So how do you want to handle this?" "I was going to confront the bastard. Find out where this kid came from." Marco nodded. "We can figure out what to do with him then." "Do with me?" Luffy asked. "What does that mean?" "Nothing," Thatch assured him. "We just want to take you back home. But we have to talk to your father first." "Okay, you're not going to kill me, right?" Luffy asked him. Usually when people say that, that's what they mean. That would make sense since he was on a slave ship. Dealing with someone had taken a different meaning here. "I swear no one's going to hurt you," Thatch promised, and Marco nodded. "See, we have a captain too, Luffy, a really powerful one," Marco told him. "And he would never forgive us if we did something so low as to hurt a child. So no one, not us or our friends, are going to lay a finger on you, all right? That's a promise on our flag. Do you believe me?" Luffy nodded. "Good." Marco smiled. "Stay here for a second, okay? I need to talk to Thatch, adult stuff." He ushered his friend away, going just out of earshot of the child so they could talk freely. "Still no sign of the captain, but he's here." "I know it. We got a good portion of the crew, but the stragglers are still out there," Marco informed him. "And the slaves? We have only come across 2 that are still alive." "2?" Thatch asked. "Last I heard it was just that one. The teenager." "Yeah, well, I found another. He needs medical attention. Desperately. He left a trail of blood behind him." "So where is he then?" "He got away." "You're kidding," Thatch said. "He escaped you." "Not quite. I gave him to James to take back to the ship." 20 minutes later, James had a bump the size of an apple on his head and the kid was in the wind. So it was a kid. He looked about the same age as the first one, but he was in worse shape. We need to get to him before the guards do. We will find him, Thatch promised his friend. For Rose, they would save every slave they could. So, this kid, Marco pressed. What's the deal with him? Most kids in his place would be crying their eyes out. Oh, he is super weird, Thatch agreed. I have no clue what's going on, but everything about this situation is off. I was going to ask if you could take a look at him. I think he might be drugged. He seemed pretty coherent, Marco said, looking back over at him. He was zipping around the room, running from wall to wall like they had taken him to the park instead of a storage room. He seems normal, but he can't tell me anything about himself. Not his age or family. He couldn't even remember his own name for a solid 5 minutes. He had to go through the alphabet a dozen times before he could tell me. Marco looked at him. Okay, that's super weird. You think it's drugs? What else could it be? He wasn't even fazed when he met me. If anything, he was ecstatic that I was letting him go outside. This goes beyond just an abuse situation, doesn't it? I honestly can't tell you, Marco said, turning his gaze to where Luffy was happily zipping around without a care in the world. He did a handstand, walking about 10 steps on his hands before collapsing onto his back in a fit of giggles. Honestly, the way he was acting, Marco wouldn't be surprised if he had never left the room before. Hey, Luffy, can you come here? Marco asked, and the kid bounced over to them, smiling brightly. Yeah, I'm going to take a look at you. Is that okay? Well, I guess. He looked longingly at the open room behind them. Want to see me do a flip? In a minute, Marco told him, gently pushing him to sit down on one of the boxes. Thatch here was telling me that you don't really remember much. You can't tell me how old you are. He shook his head as Marco checked his eyes. Last name. He shook his head again. Do you know the time? No. Do you know what day it is? No. Month then? Year? Century? Anything? What's a century? He looked at his head first, feeling for any scars. But all Marco found were more bruises. The same with the rest of him. There were no needle marks on his arms or under his shirt, just a whole lot of fresh or healing injuries that were obvious the result of being beaten. Your father did all of this. Behind him, Thatch swore at the extensive network of bruises on his stomach. I dunno, Luffy said, looking down at himself. Okay, Luffy. Marco crouched down in front of him. Let's start small. Do you remember yesterday? Yeah. What did you do? I woke up, ate breakfast. You were chained up. How did you get breakfast? I'm not always chained up, Luffy told them. Only when I'm not in my bed. I guess 'cause there's a padlock on it. There's a padlock on your bed? Thatch asked, feeling sick. Yeah, it's like one of those beds that closes, you know. He gestured with his hands, the shutting of a lid. You mean a trunk? You sleep in a padlocked trunk? Luffy nodded, oblivious to the men's absolute disgust. Except when he has to go to work, he puts me in his bed. He says so I don't get scared when I wake up and he's gone. Which is weird 'cause I don't get scared. I'm not a little kid. Yes, you're very mature, Marco humored him. Luffy nodded in agreement. What if he is gone all day? Then I have to stay in bed all day, which is so boring. I always just fall back asleep. What if you have to pee or something? I only get to drink water and food when he's not at work. Oh, that's it, this guy is dead, Thatch said. Marco put his hand on his shoulder, trying to rein him in a bit so he could get to the bottom of this. So yesterday, you woke up and he let you out of the box and what? I got double breakfast. Luffy smiled at the memory. What's that? It's breakfast but double. He said it like they were idiots. I get twice the food. It's awesome. Sometimes I get triple breakfast. But it's only 'cause he didn't feed me the day before because he was working. He said I complained so much about being hungry it gave him a headache. So breakfast. Then I took a shower. For like 2 hours. It takes you 2 hours to shower. No, I just have to stay there for 2 hours because he locks the door so I don't bother him while he's working. It's really warm so I fall asleep again. And after that, Marco asked, he does work at his desk, and I get to run around the office. Sometimes when he is in a really good mood he lets me run around both rooms and jump all over the place. But mostly I have to sit on the couch and stay quiet so I'm not distracting. Thatch had a hard time believing Luffy was very good at that. He seemed like a high-energy kid. Then I got double lunch and dinner. But I was running around too much after that, so I got put to bed super early. Didn't he have to leave to do captain stuff yesterday? Luffy nodded. Yay, then I have to go back in the box. Why is he so obsessed with keeping you there? Have you run away before? Of course I have. Luffy said it like they were idiots. I'm not insane. I don't want to stay in that room all day. It is so boring. But I always get caught super quickly 'cause the crew works for him and stuff. And then he gets super mad and freaks out so it's harder to escape the next time. Your ankle, Thatch said, horrified. Luffy, don't take this the wrong way, but you are surprisingly well adjusted for growing up in a box, Marco told him. You don't have any muscle atrophy. In fact, aside from being underweight, your health looks good. I guess that depends on how old you really are though. What if I'm like 40 or something? He asked. Well, I would be older than you, Thatch. You're not 40, Marco told him. You're somewhere between 10 and preteen if I had to guess. He made a face. That's no fun. So you remember yesterday? What about the day before? Yeah. And the week before that? Yeah. The last month? I think so. The last year? Luffy shrugged. Kind of. I don't understand what that means. He tugged on his hair in frustration. I don't know. It happened. I remember it happening. Like I know I lived it. But I don't remember the details. He sighed in frustration. It's hard to explain. You keep saying I forget. But I don't. 'Cause then it would be like something is missing, right? But nothing's missing. So you think you lived your whole life this way? Marco asked. Luffy shrugged. I guess. Thatch shook his head at Marco, over Luffy's shoulder, not buying it for a second. And Marco was inclined to agree. Okay, show me your handstand. Marco told him, and Luffy jumped up excitedly. No way, Thatch said as they watched Luffy tumble around the room. He's not withdrawn, not socially awkward. He's a bit weird. But overall, he seems pretty normal. I know, Marco told him. He's definitely had people, obviously different people, taking care of him. I can't explain what's wrong with his memory. His pupils were dilated beyond normal, but there are no signs that he was being drugged aside from that. He seems to have been malnourished in the past, but he isn't currently being starved. So what do we do with him? Thatch said, watching him run around. You were right, we need to have a talk with his father. No way that monster raised a kid this happy. He probably took him from someone. If we can find out who, then we can take him back. And if we can't, then I guess we are going to be babysitting him for a little while. Half portions for half men, the guard said as he dropped the plates into their cell. Ace and Sabo would get a half bowl while Luffy always got a half of that, because, in their words, he was a half of their half, which meant that twice a day he got a quarter portion of food and water. His brothers, in the truest sign of love, would share equally with him, so they each had the same amount, which was nice of them, but also not enough for any of them. Luffy felt it the hardest. He had started getting tired and passing out during the day. Usually at work, Sabo was always quick to cover for him, and Ace would take the fall when he failed to salvage the situation. Ace passed out all the time. His narcolepsy was made worse by the hunger and his injuries. He went down once a day at least. At first the guards had punished him as severely as they punished Luffy, but soon it became too much effort for them. After all, they had things to do that weren't beating up a snoring teenager for an hour each day. That seemed to lose its appeal, and after the second week the guards would just make him finish whatever work he had missed during the nighttime. But Sabo and Luffy always helped, so it never took very long, except for tonight. Because tonight Luffy had done something horrible. He had been too hungry and passed out on the floor. He had knocked a lantern over, which started a fire that burned through 3 boxes of stored food until they could get it under control. Unsure of what to do, he had taken off, hiding himself between 2 barrels on one of the lower levels of the ship. He stayed there for an hour, watching the thudding feet of guards trample past as they searched for him. They knew it was him. They had seen him down here. There was no getting out of this one. He sniffed, bringing his knees tighter against him. If he closed his eyes really hard, he could pretend he was back home. His grandpa was visiting him and he was hiding in the jungle. He had to be quiet because he didn't want to get punched. But Garp would just kick him around a bit, try and toughen him up. Nothing like these guys. They would kill him. Luffy, he felt his nose begin to run again. Luffy, it's me, where are you? He recognized Ace's feet as they passed. His brother sounded scared. That was bad. Wiping his nose with the back of his hand, Luffy crawled out of his hiding spot. His brother turned around, relief on his face as he caught sight of him. Oh, thank God. I thought they were going to find you first. I'm sorry. Luffy's lip trembled. I don't want to die, Ace. He sniffed again. They keep saying they are going to kill me. Please don't let me die. He didn't really know what he was asking for. He was just scared. Ace opened his mouth. His eyes were soft. And then he froze, his eyes looking beyond Luffy. So you want me to die instead of you? There was nothing kind in his voice anymore. No, Luffy hiccuped. That's what you're asking. I don't want anything to happen to you. I'm just scared. Do you know how much I've been taking care of you? Just because you're scared. He snarled. Do you know how much of a burden you are to us? I would be fine if I didn't have to keep constantly cleaning up your messes. Ever think of that? I'm sorry. Luffy pulled his hat down over his eyes. I didn't want you to get hurt from me. Well, I did, over and over and over. Why are you saying this stuff? Luffy was trembling, unsure of what to do. Because I asked you to cover for me one time, just one time, and you try to hide. You asked me to cover for you, Luffy repeated stupidly. But I was the one. God, you're stupid, Ace said in exasperation, running his hands through his hair. And for a second, he sounded like his usual self. But then the moment was gone. He pulled a book of matches from his pocket to show Luffy. They might have taken my powers away, but I can still destroy things. I burned the cargo hold, and with any luck I can burn this whole ship down before those idiots even notice. Thoroughly confused now, Luffy tried to come towards Ace, but the older boy pushed him away. He lit one of the matches, throwing it straight towards Luffy. He cried in surprise as it hit his arm. He brushed it to the floor, rubbing the burned skin on his arm as he tried to approach Ace, only to get hit in the face with another match. Ace, stop. They're going to get mad at you. He rubbed his forehead. Like you care. I don't want anything to happen to you, Luffy insisted. I'm sorry I asked you for help. I won't ever do it again. I promise. I'll deal with everything on my own. Just please don't hate me. I don't want you to hate me. Lou, Ace said, caught off guard. And Luffy wrapped his arms around his brother's middle, burying his head into his chest as he started to cry. I'm sorry. And the next second he was thrown to the floor. Get off me, Ace snarled. Luffy tried to crawl towards him, but Ace slammed his foot into his stomach. Go. When he shook his head, Ace kicked him again and again. Get off. Stop, Luffy cried as he sat up, trying to get to Ace again. His brother grabbed the collar of his shirt and threw him down the other end of the hallway. If you don't leave right now, I will hate you forever. I mean it, Ace screamed. The thought of being hated by him forever and ever had Luffy pushing himself to his feet. He ran as fast as he could down the hallway. He was crying so hard by the time he reached the stairs that he ran smack into the railing. He hit the floor with a thud. He lay dazed on the floor, staring up at the ceiling. Ace hated him. He didn't think so. But everything Ace had said was right. He was a burden to his brothers. He needed to get up. He needed to tell one of the guards what he had done. It was the only way Ace wouldn't hate him forever, even if they killed him. But for the life of him he couldn't stop crying because he was being abandoned by the person he never thought would leave him. Here he is, one of the guards called out from the top of the stairway. Luffy closed his eyes, gasping out as he heard the feet come down the stairs. I did it. He screamed as loud as he could. I caused the fire. It was me. I deserve to be punished. Yea, we know, idiot, one of the guards said, yanking Luffy's arm back as they pulled him up. Why do you think we've been looking for you half the night? Are you going to kill me? Yea, probably. You're not much use to us, especially if you keep doing shit like this. Can you leave my brothers alone? He sobbed. If they don't interfere, we don't have any reason to, the man said, but he was interrupted by a shout from the hallway. Fire, fire on the ship. Get help. What did you do? The man swore as he called to his friends. Don't move. He yelled at Luffy as they sprinted towards the cry. Luffy didn't move. He didn't think he could anymore. He sniffed once and again trying to get his breathing under control, even as the hallway filled with the smell of smoke which stung his eyes and made it hard to breathe. A few minutes later he heard a lighter set of footprints come down the stairs as Sabo finally caught up to them. Luffy, he screamed, dropping beside the boy. Thank God you're okay. He tried to hug him, but Luffy pushed him away, scrambling back. You hate me, he cried. What? No, Sabo said. Ace hates me. Who said that? He did, Luffy said, bringing his knees to his chest. I mess everything up for you guys. He said he hates me forever. Luffy, there were gentle but firm hands forcing his head up. Look at me. His brother's face was pale and there was something close to terror in his eyes. Where is Ace? Luffy pointed a finger towards the hallway, and Sabo was up and running in an instant, leaving his little brother sobbing at the bottom of the stairs. The fire was almost put out by the time Sabo got there. The entire hallway had gone up in smoke before the guards got a handle on it. Ace was already on his stomach. He was being pinned by two men as they screamed at him. Of course, it was the flame starter. The guard remarked, take the fire out of a pyromaniac and there's still pyro, with or without powers. Too bad you couldn't die with the fire. Ace hissed at them. One of the guards slammed his head against the ground for that. Do you even know how much trouble you're in? We ought to kill you for this. No, this is beyond us. Someone go get the captain. And something inside Sabo snapped. He screamed as he ran towards his brother. But before he had even made it halfway down the hallway, one of the men grabbed him. There you are, Goldilocks. I was wondering where you went off to, the man said as Sabo thrashed in his grip. Look what happens when you don't watch him closely enough. Stop, Sabo screamed at the top of his lungs. It was sent him. Oh yeah, then who was it? That kid. You. Yes, Sabo cried. It was me. Anyone but him. Shut up, Sabo. Ace hissed. You try, kid. But it was Flamehead here. I watched him light the hallway up like a Christmas tree. Sick and tired of this and everything, Sabo drove his elbow straight into the nose of the man who was holding him. He heard him cry out as he was released. He threw himself forwards, pushing ahead towards Ace. He had to save him, he had to. There was a bang, loud enough to shatter his eardrums, and the next thing he knew he was on the floor. For a second, he thought he had been pushed, but then he felt the pain in his ankle and saw the blood begin to pool around him. That was a gunshot. They had shot him. His fingers gripped the wound, instantly becoming slippery. He distantly heard Ace screaming as he was pinned down. And then someone hit him across the back of the head and he crumpled into the floor, where he stayed as the world swam in and out of focus. Jesus, did you kill him? A voice asked above Ace's screaming. He felt someone grab his shoulder and he groaned in pain. No, he is just in shock. What do we have here? A soft voice broke out and in an instant the room became quiet. Captain, one of the men stuttered. One of the slaves tried to set some fires, but we apprehended him. Though, in this one, Sabo felt his hair being touched, but he couldn't bring himself to sit up or do anything other than lay brokenly on the floor. He's just trying to protect the other one. All three of them actually confessed. 3 of them. The captain's voice traveled across the room. We thought their little brother set the fire, the man corrected. But it turns out this one was just trying to frame him. Real cold bastard. I watched the whole thing. Is that so? What do you want us to do with him? Should we kill him? No, Sabo moaned, finally finding his voice. Shut it, you. The guard said, hitting his shoulder. Killing him won't make up for the money he destroyed, will it? The captain said coolly. No, he will live. He will just wish he hadn't. Please, Sabo whispered into the floor. Don't hurt him. Take him away. One of the guards said. Sabo, Sabo. Ace's voice was gentle but insistent. It took a few tries, but Sabo managed to lift his head from the floor and his blurry vision fixed on Ace. I'm sorry, he choked out. But Ace shook his head as the guards hauled him to his feet. Take care of Luffy while I'm gone, okay? He isn't strong like you and me yet, so you have to protect him. Please don't go, Sabo whispered, but they took Ace away all the same. And unlike the other times, they never brought him back. Luffy, Sabo cried out as he ran into the captain's chambers. It had taken over an hour of running around the upper levels to find it, but now that he was here it seemed like he had been too slow. Luffy, come out, please, he begged as he searched the office, looking under the desk before continuing to the other rooms. He had to be here. Where else would the captain have put him? Unless he wasn't with the captain anymore. Luffy. But there was no answer. He tried the bedroom next, finding the bed unmade and a chain unlocked. Sabo picked it up, giving it a tug to test the strength. Yes, you're such a good parent, he mocked under his breath. The captain hadn't mentioned anything about forcibly keeping Luffy here. Not when he had bragged to Sabo about it what felt like a lifetime ago. He had said that Luffy was his family now, and that Luffy loved him more than he ever loved Sabo. Sabo didn't know about all that, but it wasn't like they ever had to force Luffy to stay with them. He kicked the bed in frustration, completely out of ideas as to where either of his brothers were. He was running out of time. Luffy's straw hat was tied around his neck. He had been holding onto it for him ever since he had been taken away. Sabo didn't know if he even remembered it anymore, but either way he would keep it safe for him. Even when situations seemed hopeless, like they did right now, Luffy could always see the bright side of things. Sabo needed that the most right now. I don't know what to do, Lou, he told the empty bed. I just miss you. You. A voice hissed and Sabo spun around startled. The captain stood in the doorway. He had been so distracted by his thoughts he hadn't heard the other approach. But it was too late to run now. Not when the man was blocking the door. Sabo took a step back, feeling caught off guard. This was not good. You took him. The man snarled. I told you to forget about him. He chose me, not you. He didn't choose you. Sabo yelled back at him, even as his back hit the bed. Where is he? The man roared and the fury in his voice was frightening. I don't know, Sabo snapped. If I did, I wouldn't be here. Liar. Sabo's hand tightened on the chain, angered by the accusation. I never lied about anything. Unlike you. This is what you think love is. He threw the chain at the man. It hit him on the side of his face and he crumpled like paper. And Sabo took off, brushing past the man as he sprinted out of the bedroom. The captain's hand snaked out to grab his ankle and Sabo fell to the floor. The gun skittered from his waist. He kicked back blindly before pushing himself onto his feet and bolting towards the door, abandoning the weapon. But the captain was right on his heels. He heard the stumbling of the man as he chased Sabo down the hallway. There was a bang, and he felt something fly past his foot, sending him crashing once more to the ground. He rolled onto his back, just in time to see down the barrel of his stolen gun, as the captain pointed it at him. I should have gotten rid of you months ago. The man hissed, his finger tightening on the trigger. Sabo moved instinctively, his foot colliding with the barrel of the gun, knocking it off course just as it went off. The bullet launched into the floor inches from his head in a spray of splinters. Not giving the bastard time to shoot again, Sabo wrapped both of his feet around the man's hand and twisted his body. The gun was yanked from his grip as it fell to the floor once more. Sabo dove for it, but the captain was quicker. He fell onto the blonde, knees on either side of him as he tried to wrap his hands around his neck. I told you to stay away from my son. The man spat as he tightened his hold. Sabo gasped, trying to pull the arms away. He's not your damn son. He breathed, bringing his knee up to hit the man in his ribs. But his weak attempts of freeing himself did little more than irritate him. Kidnapping someone, out of misplaced abandonment issues or whatever that psycho had going on in his brain, did not make him a father. Sabo would have gladly told him this, but he didn't think he could. Dark spots were beginning to dance across his eyes, and he knew he would pass out soon. And just then, at the moment he was sure he was going to die, something slammed into the captain's head and he collapsed onto Sabo. He brought in grateful breaths, choking on nothing as his vision slowly came back to him. His eyes were watering from the strain of everything. He felt the weight disappear as the captain was shoved off of him and he was carefully hauled to his feet. "Ace," Sabo whispered, his voice sounding damaged. The older boy smiled at him, looping Sabo's arm around his neck as he pulled him down the corridor, just as the captain started to shoot at them again. But Ace was faster. Adrenaline mixed with desperation had him sprinting down the hallway, dragging his brother beside him. He didn't stop running until a full 5 minutes after the last gunshot. He had led them down so many side hallways and detours even Sabo was spectacularly lost. Finally Ace stopped, dropping them both onto the floor when it felt like his legs were on the verge of collapsing under him. Sabo was still trying to catch his breath, gasping on his hands and knees. Marathon sprinting for your life and being choked were a bad combination. "That guy was pissed," Ace said, tipping his head back to the ceiling. "What did you do to him?" Sabo threw his arms around the other's neck, pulling him tightly against him. "Shut up," he said. Ace smiled, retuning the gesture with all of his heart. The two of them stayed there, clinging onto one another on the floor of some forgotten hallway, too scared to let go. "I missed you," Sabo spoke into his shoulder. "I missed you too," he told him. "So much I thought I was going to go crazy." "You're already crazy," Sabo told him, tightening his arms. "Lighting the boat on fire. You idiot, what were you thinking?" Ace laughed a little bit, but he instantly regretted it when he saw Sabo's face. The other looked like he was about to start crying, something he had never seen Sabo do before. "That was how you know you messed up big time." "I don't know, I saw Luffy's face, and I saw the guard watching us and it just kind of happened." "Luffy thought you hated him," Sabo told him softly. "I know," Ace said. "I'll make it up to him. I promise." He looked around, as if the littlest was going to somehow materialize. "So, where is he?" Sabo froze, his eyes widening as he finally pulled away from Ace. Sensing something was seriously wrong, Ace let go of him as well, meeting the frantic look of the other with fear. "Ace, I am so sorry." "No," Ace said, shaking his head in disbelief. "Don't you dare." "Listen, Sabo, don't." "He's alive," Sabo said quickly, realizing what Ace thought he was trying to say. "He's alive, I know he is." Ace closed his eyes in relief, tilting his head back as he breathed air into his lungs, trying to steady his hammering heart. "Gods damn you. You scared me the other half of the way to death." "I'm sorry," Sabo told him. "I didn't mean to. I have to tell you something." "Where is he?" "Someone took him." "Took him?" Ace asked, trying to understand. "Took him where?" "We're on a boat." "He's here, he has to be," Sabo said. "It was that man that was chasing us. The captain. You've met him before. He's the one who took Lou away." "What? Why?" "He is all kinds of crazy. I think he wants to play house. He said that Luffy is his now, and I should forget about him. I think he wants to adopt him or something." "Adopt him? Aren't we slaves to these people? What kind of slave trader adopts one?" "I said he's crazy." "Well then let's go get him. We find that guy, beat the crap out of him and take Luffy back." "It's not that easy," Sabo told him. "Luffy's not with him. That's why he attacked me. He thought I had him." "Then where the hell is he?" "I don't know," Sabo said. "Someone must have untied him. If it wasn't us, or the captain, it might have been the pirates." Ace's face paled further, if that was at all possible. "We need to get him back quickly. Who knows what they will do to him? They don't seem like bad people." They were Rose's friends. "Rose? That nice lady in the cell next to us?" Sabo nodded. "Yeah, she died." "Oh," Ace said. "You liked her, right?" "Yeah, I really did. She was kind." That was a rare trait in people, especially in a place like this. "They're all dead now, everyone but us." Ace fell silent, looking at the ground as Sabo stared into space, imagining all those faces, personalities, and lives that had been destroyed on a whim. The whim of the man who had taken their brother. "Ace, listen, there's something you don't know. I didn't know how to tell you." "With your voice, spit it out." Ace told him. "I've had enough surprises today. Luffy's not Luffy anymore. Not annoying anymore." That was the first word out of Ace's mouth. Any other time Sabo would have laughed at the other's confusion. But right now he didn't feel like anything would ever be funny again. "No, I went looking for him a few months ago. I wanted to make sure he was okay, and I found him." "Was he okay?" "He was okay enough, I guess. He's not starving anymore at least." But he looked straight at me, and he didn't know who I was. "What? How is that possible?" "Wait, does he remember me?" "I don't know, but he was weird, like spacey and kind of out of it." Ace was silent for a long moment before he answered. "You were supposed to look after him." "I know, I am so sorry." "No," Ace said. "That wasn't fair, I didn't mean that. I just shit. I don't know what we're going to do about any of this." "Me either," Sabo told him, leaning against his shoulder in comfort. "We need to get Luffy back. We can worry about everything else then." Ace nodded, still looking unnaturally pale. His skin was covered in blood and soot, and coming from Sabo, who was nearing the point of leaving a dirt trail behind him, that was saying something. He sighed, pulling his sleeve over his hand as he gently wiped Ace's face, careful of the wounds on his skin. "You look awful," he told him. "When was the last time you had any real food?" "When was the last time any of us had real food?" Ace countered. "I'll be okay, Sab, at least until we can get out of here." He reached out with his filthy hand to touch his brother's cheek affectionately. I only made it this far thanks to you. I would have starved without you. I know that. You always have a plan, don't you? Thank you, Sabo. Sabo smiled back at him, like I would ever let anything happen to our big brother. Aw, you said it. I finally got you to say it. Who's stupid now? Still you, and that was the only time. Ever. We are on equal terms, got it? Whatever you say, little brother. Then I'm going to go swimming and camping and fishing and sleep out under all the stars, Luffy babbled excitedly, and eat pancakes and a ton of meat every day, whenever I want, and second and third and fourth breakfast. Thatch said nothing as he let Luffy ramble, the little kid sticking close to his side as they made their way through the ship. His plan was to take Luffy back to their ship where he would be safe and Thatch would be free to join the search for the captain. After all, this was no place for a child. Either Luffy didn't notice that they were currently in a war zone or he just didn't care. Either way, Thatch was grateful for the lack of drama and Luffy's absolute absence of attachment to his father. It made all of this much easier. Instead, he filled the silence with everything he planned on doing once he got off the ship and away from his controlling captor. Aren't you a little bit nervous? Thatch asked. About what? Luffy asked as he scurried over a partially smashed crate just for the fun of it. They were lucky to avoid the fighting so far, but there was evidence of it littered all around. Everything, Thatch told him. This is all you know, right? He gestured around and Luffy nodded. Well, what are you going to do without it? I just told you, I'm going to go swimming in. No, I got that. Most kids in your place would be a bit worried. Thatch just couldn't figure him out. Nervous about what? I'm not sure. The unknown can be a bit scary. So can change. Yeah, but I didn't like it here, right? Luffy said matter of fact like. So why would I be sad to leave? Besides, why should I be scared? You guys said you won't let anything really bad happen to me, yeah? Thatch smiled at him, unable to argue with that. Yeah, he assured him. You'll be okay. Luffy smiled brightly up at him, his wide eyes on Thatch's face. Then just to the right of his head as something else seemed to grab his attention. The smile fell away as he reached out to clutch at Thatch's hand, something he claimed to be too grown up to need. Thatch felt Luffy's hand at the same moment he heard a sound behind him. Don't! Luffy cried as something flew towards Thatch. The pirate shoved Luffy behind him a moment before someone attacked him. The last thing Thatch saw was a strong hand reaching out for his face, and then he knew nothing else. Luffy was inconsolable. It was nearing a week since Ace had been taken, and since then they hadn't been allowed to see him even once. Although Sabo was still fighting to make sure he got food, Luffy was taking it really hard. He thought the whole thing was his fault, despite Sabo promising him that Ace didn't actually hate him. Up until that point, Luffy had been happy. Well, happy-ish. He didn't enjoy their current living conditions, but he found a way to keep smiling and laughing no matter how bad things had gotten for them. But now, Sabo could hardly get him to eat anything. He no longer left their cell to work. At first the guards had been furious, but after trying every kind of kicking they knew, they eventually gave up. But the incident had not been forgotten, and one of the guards had given Sabo a terrifying warning. Slaves who don't work don't get fed. I know, Sabo told him. Luffy hadn't been wanting to eat anyways, but Sabo forced him to eat some of his rations. Well, is he going to help out or not? You took away our older brother, Sabo tried to explain. Luffy is just sad right now. Yay, I don't care how sad he is. Do you know how much men sell for? No, Sabo stammered. Well, not as much as females. And do you know how much scrawny kids like him sell for? Less than even that. We're going to make a quarter of the usual price off of him. I don't. Listen, if he isn't working, and we can't motivate him to work anymore, and he won't make us much money, well then he isn't really worth keeping, is he? No, Sabo said, understanding what the man was saying. He will. I'll find a way. I'll make him. I can do his work. Just don't hurt him, please. I can't. You can't hurt him. He will work. God, shut up, the man said. You're a broken record. Fine, make him work again and you have nothing to worry about. Sabo was able to force Luffy off the floor of the cell to go back to work through a mixture of begging and guilt. He helped Luffy with every task he was assigned, and he watched him like a hawk. Unlike before, there was no Ace to help, so if Luffy messed up again and Sabo took the fall, there would be no one to protect him. And Sabo had a horrible feeling the guards would do something awful if he left Luffy alone that long. His worst fear was to be dragged away only to come back to an empty cell. He couldn't let that happen. Please don't kill him, Luffy begged as he threw himself on top of Thatch. The older man was unconscious on the floor, unaware of the danger he was in. The captain pushed forwards, his sword drawn. You disobeyed me. I'm sorry, Luffy cried, his little fingers digging into Thatch's shirt. I won't do it again. You always disobey me. You have to learn. Your actions have consequences. I know, Luffy cried. Don't hurt Thatch and I will listen to you. I'll never run away again. He cried out as the man tried to yank him off. You don't realize who this man is. It doesn't matter. He was going to hurt you. Was not, Luffy said, getting angry now. You are too naive to know better. You know nothing of the real world. Now move aside. His hands grabbed Luffy's arm as he pried him off Thatch. Luffy cried as he was thrown to the ground. You don't yet understand anything. You are so ungrateful you would choose a stranger over your family. Luffy pushed himself to his feet. He had never seen the man so angry before, not even when he tried to run away. If he didn't do something, then Thatch was going to die, and Luffy didn't want that. Dad, please, he cried, grabbing onto the man's arm before he could bring the sword down on the unconscious pirate. He almost always got his way when he called him that, and even though Luffy didn't really know what it meant, not all the way, he didn't care, so long as he won this one. If you let him go, I won't run away again. I won't ever trust anyone else. I'll listen to you always and go wherever you want me to. I won't even complain anymore. Just don't kill him. The man turned towards him, the blade inches from Thatch. Is that so? Luffy nodded, wiping his nose with his sleeve. And you will keep your word? Yes, father. The man contemplated for a moment before he stepped back, sheathing his sword. There will be consequences if you lie. I won't. The man nodded, holding out his hand. Luffy took it reluctantly as he followed him out of the room. Why, Thatch? Luffy sat on the floor of the darkened dining room, cradling his head on his knees as he tried to stop himself from crying. Today was the 5th day back at work and he still felt awful. Nothing was the same without Ace, and Luffy knew that it was all his fault. It was just a matter of time before he lost Sabo to a careless mistake, and then he would be all alone. Forever. He should be trying harder to work, to be better. But he couldn't stop being sad, no matter what Sabo said or did. If the guards caught him crying, it would be bad. So until he stopped, he was hiding in here. Nobody ever really came in here, so he would be left alone. Luffy knew that because he had hidden here before. It was only used at dinner time for the fancy men on the ship to eat and stuff. At least he thought. Right when he was about to go back, he heard the door open. Unsure of what else to do, he scampered beneath the table, tucking himself behind one of the table legs just in time before the person entered. He couldn't see them from below the table, but he saw their boots. They weren't a guard. Their shoes were too clean for that. Hopefully that meant they wouldn't get Luffy in trouble if they found him. He hoped they would leave quickly, but they didn't. Instead, the boots lingered at one of the shelves, and he heard the noise of rifling as some items were sorted. Everyone on this ship was weird, he decided. Luffy pushed back a little further, his tiny fingers tangling in the carpet underneath him. It was nice, really pretty and colorful. Not like anything he had seen before. Sabo said that meant it was for rich people, and historically Luffy didn't like rich people. There was something hard and cold buried in the carpet threads. He frowned as his hand closed around some type of metal circle. He picked it up, feeling along it in the darkness. It was heavy and shiny. It was the weight and size of a circular pond stone, only made of gold with a little silver chain running along it. Luffy liked how smooth it was under his fingers. Maybe he could show it to Sabo, and they could throw it against the wall or something for fun. With that thought in mind, he slipped it into his pocket. First, he just needed the man to leave, but he wasn't going fast enough. The boots had moved from the shelves to the bookcase before drifting closer to the table. And then without warning, one of the boots kicked the table in anger, causing the entire thing to shudder. Luffy jumped, slamming his knee against the leg by accident. He covered his mouth to stop himself from crying out, but the damage had already been done. The man had heard the thunk. Someone's here, came a low voice. He didn't sound angry, at least. Luffy curled in on himself. He couldn't get caught. He wasn't going to cause more problems for his brother. When neither moved, the man grew impatient and crouched down to his hands and knees to see for himself. Listen, whatever this is about. He trailed off as he locked eyes with Luffy. Ah, you're just a little boy. Luffy kept his mouth shut, tightening his hold on his knees. You're a slave then, he said, noticing the state of Luffy's clothes and the cuff around his ankle. They aren't supposed to take them this young. Luffy didn't know what to say to that. He didn't really think there were any rules when it came to stealing people. It's okay, boy, come out from under there. Luffy didn't dare move. The man sighed as he adjusted his position to sit on the floor so he could see Luffy better. Yeah, I can't imagine they've been very nice to you, have they? You look like you were having a rough time. He was talking about the wet streaks on Luffy's cheeks. Luffy wiped them clumsily, sniffing back the rest of the tears. He didn't need sympathy from them. What's wrong, little one? Luffy just shook his head. There was silence between the two of them for a moment before the man spoke. I understand a little of what you must feel, the man told him. I'm a bit sad today as well. It feels as if the world is ending, but everyone else just keeps going about their lives, like they don't even care. You're sad? Luffy asked. The man nodded. I miss my family. It's the day, well, I suppose it's an anniversary of sorts, and I must have dropped them. Dropped them? Luffy echoed. My pocket watch, it's my prized possession. They gave it to me and it is my only picture of them. It's like carrying around a little piece of them with me, but I've lost it now. Today of all days. Oh, Luffy said. He supposed that was sad. And what about you? I won't tell anyone, he promised. Luffy looked the man over again. He didn't know why a stranger would care, but he guessed someone that missed their family might understand. You won't tell no one? Not a soul. I miss my brother, Luffy said. Your brother? He nodded, feeling the tears threaten to well up again. They took him away a few days ago cause they think he started a fire, but he was just protecting me and I can't see him anymore and I think he hates me now, but I don't care. I just really miss him and stuff and I want him to come back. He won't ever and I think Sabo thinks he's going to die and I want him back." Luffy rambled. "Oh, I see," the man said after a moment. "So that's what that was about. You said you wouldn't tell anyone, right? Cause I don't want to get my other brother in any more trouble. Your secret's safe with me if mine is safe with you. Now will you come out?" Luffy reluctantly crawled out from under the table while the man went to turn the lights on. "So what's your name, little one?" "I'm Luffy." "Well, Luffy, it's nice to meet you." Luffy tilted his head. "Why are you being nice to me?" "Certainly, the first person not in shackles who had been. I suppose I have a bit of a soft spot for children. My son's around your age. You remind me a bit of him. He's a tough thing too, always looking out for his mother." "Oh," Luffy said. "You lost their thingy, right?" "My pocket watch." "What's it look like?" "A pocket watch. It's a flat circular item with golden engraving around the edges, my god." Luffy had pulled it from his pocket to show the man. "Here." He handed it over easily. "You found it." "It was under the table." Luffy told him. "You found it, and you would give it back." "Just like that." "Of course, what would I do with it?" Luffy figured he should keep the hucking it at the wall part to himself. He wanted the man to have his family more than he wanted entertainment. "Surely you deserve some kind of reward. Can you get my brother back?" He brightened at the thought. "I am sorry, little one. It's beyond my control." "Oh," Luffy fell back on himself. "Anything else I can do?" "No," he told him. All he wanted was to see Ace. "It's okay. At least you get your family back." Luffy supposed that was good, even if he couldn't have his. The man stared at him for a long moment before he put his hand out, patting his hair. "You are a good kid, aren't you? Thank you for this. You should go before you get into trouble." "'Kay," Luffy said as he moved towards the door, waving at the man as he left. Thatch. The voice was getting insistent as the man felt his shoulder shake. "Marco," he said, sitting up in confusion. His head felt horrible, like his brains got replaced with wet cement. "What happened?" Marco questioned him. "Are you all right?" Thatch looked around. He was lying in the center of one of the storerooms. He tried to rack his brain for what had happened, but he came up empty. He had no clue. He didn't remember even coming in here. His whole brain felt foggy and confused, like he was disconnected from everything. "Thatch, where's Luffy?" Thatch looked around, panicking for the first time. He pushed himself to his feet even as Marco tried to stop him. "Luffy," he called out to the darkened room. "Luffy," but there was no reply. "This is not happening." Thatch muttered. "Tell me I didn't lose him." "You didn't lose him," Marco told him. "He was taken." "What?" "No, that was so much worse. It was probably his dad." "Damn, I should have anticipated this. I let him down," Thatch said in horror. "That man is unhinged. Who knows what he is going to do to him?" "We'll get him back," Marco assured him. "We are going to find the captain, make him tell us what in the hell is going on. And then we are going to get Luffy and every last slave still breathing off this boat and burn it to the ground." "Do you think Luffy can hold on?" Thatch asked, not even trying to hide his horror at the situation. "He's survived this long," Marco told him. "That kid is a lot tougher than anyone gives him credit for. His presence is required in the lounge." Sabo frowned, looking down at Luffy. "Why?" "It doesn't matter. It matters to me." Sabo reached down to grab Luffy's arm, pulling him to his side. "I'll do whatever it is instead, all right." They said him. Sabo looked down at Luffy, who was staring at him. For his part, Luffy had no problem going with him, but Sabo looked scared, and Sabo didn't get scared unless there was something to be scared about. "Is he in trouble?" "No," the guard said. "Then what do you want him for?" The man huffed, clearly annoyed now. "I don't know, to clean or something." "Look, kid, this isn't a negotiation. Either he comes with me or I take him from you and get my friend to take you somewhere else." Luffy pulled against Sabo. "It's fine," he told his brother. "I'll be back, Kay." He smiled at him as brightly as he could manage. Luffy knew he had been a burden to Ace. He refused to make that mistake twice, so he would go, if nothing else, to save Sabo from trouble. Sabo set his jaw but didn't argue as the guard unlocked the cell, letting Luffy out before locking it. "Hey," Sabo said as the man turned away. "Hey." The guard turned around. "You don't hurt him," Sabo warned. "Or what?" The guard mocked, grabbing Luffy's arm. "You'll kill me." Sabo didn't say anything, but he reached out to grab the bars, and something on his face seemed to scare the man as his face paled. He tightened his grip on Luffy's arm as he pulled him away. "Come on," he muttered. "We're late." Luffy looked back at Sabo as the man pulled him along the hallways. His brother stood in their cell, his hand gripping the bars so hard the skin was white. He was staring at him. The guard thought he was angry, but Luffy knew Sabo wasn't. He was scared. Luffy smiled back at him as the guard pulled him around the corner and he lost sight of Sabo altogether. When his pace slowed, the guard yanked his arm cruelly, causing him to stumble a bit. The man's hold didn't loosen and Luffy was forced to keep up with the quick pace. "Where are we going?" "Shut up," the man told him. "Can you take me to Ace?" "Who?" "My brother, the one you took away cause of the fire." Luffy tried to pry the large fingers off of his arm, They were starting to hurt him, but the grip didn't budge. I miss him and I really need to tell him something. Please, shut up, the man snapped. Your psycho brother deserved what he got, and you're never going to see him again. You should be grateful we let you stay with Blondie back there after all the mistakes you made. But we can always change our minds about that. Luffy felt coldness seep into him at the words. He froze and the guard yanked him forwards in annoyance. Luffy held his ground again, digging his heels into the worn wooden floor below him. What? Get moving, the man snapped. He ain't like to be kept waiting. You're going to take Sabo away from me. Luffy knew they had threatened it before, but they liked threats. He didn't think they would really do it. He figured that if it came down to it, Sabo would figure out a way to stop it. He was good at that. But Luffy remembered Sabo's face as the guard took him away. The face he was probably still wearing now back in their cell. He was scared they were going to take Luffy away, like they had taken Ace. Luffy's fault. Please don't, Luffy said as the man yanked him forwards. You can't. We can do whatever we want. Get your ass moving or you just might come back to an empty cell. Uoffmp, he cried out in surprise as Luffy stopped pulling against him, instead of pushing forwards in the direction the man was taking them. Okay, Luffy told him, no longer fighting his hold, trembling as he readily followed him down the darkened hallways of the massive ship. I promise, please don't hurt Sabo. He's a good person. Not like you. Why you? The man took a swing at him but Luffy ducked. He couldn't go very far with the guy holding his arm. The next hit caught him in the corner of his mouth, and he was knocked to the floor. Luffy sat up dizzy and confused, looking up at the angry man towering before him. He didn't understand what that was for. He was just stating facts. Sabo was nice. He took care of Luffy and always protected people that couldn't protect themselves. This man kidnapped and hurt people for money. He had to know that he wasn't a good person. Right, but apparently pointing out the obvious made him mad. People were confusing. You mouthy brat. Why ought to? He took a step closer and Luffy curled up, expecting another attack. But it never came. When Luffy looked up again, the fist of the angry man was being held. Someone had grabbed his wrist before he could land his punch. Luffy sat up confused. Enough, the newcomer said, and there was anger in his eyes. You know how I feel about violence against children. The guard gasped as his wrist was released. He held it against his chest, rubbing the reddened area. Yes, sir. Sorry, sir, he said. Now leave us. The guard was all too happy to comply, and when the man turned his expression on Luffy, it was softer. It took him a moment, but Luffy recognized his face. This wasn't another guard, this was the guy from a few days ago. The one with the pocket watch and sad family stuff. He offered his hand, and when Luffy took it, he pulled him to his feet. Are you all right? Luffy nodded, trying to pull his hand back, but the man held on. I'm sorry about him. I should have sent someone else to get you. That man is always so violent. They were all violent. Luffy tugged his hand again, wanting the man to let go of him. He wasn't a dog. He didn't need people to keep holding him like he would run off. You sent him to get me. Why? To thank you, of course, the man said. I figured I owed you for returning my pocket watch to me. You are a kind boy for doing that. That's okay, Luffy told him. I don't really want anything from you. Well, why don't you come see first? He gave Luffy's hand a squeeze, pulling him over to the room at the end of the hallway. Luffy let him hold his hand. Not because he liked it. Hand-holding was for babies, and he was trying to be a man, damn it. But he was also scared about what the guard said about taking Sabo away, so he put up with it. The room the man showed him was quite large and very nice, the lounge they had set. He had only been in here a few times. Slaves weren't supposed to be where the important nice rooms were. But what caught him off guard was the smell. It had been a while since he had been so close to warm, cooked, yummy food. One of the tables had a couple of plates on it, piled high with food. His stomach growled loudly in response, and he looked down at it. You're hungry? Luffy nodded. He was starving. Well, it's all for you ... if you want it. He finally let go of his hand, and Luffy walked over to the table, looking down at the plates. Cooked veggies, a basket of dinner rolls, a bunch of shiny-looking fruit, and, best of all, there was a huge piece of meat. Real meat, all cooked and good-smelling. Luffy felt his mouth water. He turned back to the man. It's for me. I said so, didn't I? I won't get anyone in trouble if I take it. The man smiled softly at him. No, kid, I promise. Luffy returned the smile. She. Thanks, mister. Leaving the meat for the moment, he grabbed the rolls, stuffing them into his pockets, pressing them down so more fit. He wished he had bigger pockets. What are you doing? The man asked in surprise. Taking it with me. Luffy figured he could carry the other stuff in his shirt and the meat, well, he could put that in his stomach. No, he should share it too. No, that he should eat. No, he was going to share that. But only with Sabo. The others could have the rest. Well, most of it. The man stopped him before he could put the food in his shirt. Stop. You're going to make a mess of yourself. It's not going to disappear if that's what you're worried about. I want to share it, Luffy told him, with my brother and all of the others. Can I take some to Ace too? The man stared at him for a long moment. This is for you. I know, Luffy told him. Thanks. Aren't you hungry? So hungry. Luffy agreed. Everyone is. I bet they will be super grateful to you for this. The man was staring at him now. What? Nothing, he said. You just remind me of my son. So much it catches me off guard. He was like that too. Always thought about others. So much that it got him in trouble. You know, Luffy, some people aren't worth your affection. That's not for you to decide, Luffy told him. He shook his head in wonder. You really are just like my son. It's strange. Although I suppose you're a touch less shy than he was. You speak your mind, don't you? Why wouldn't I? All right, he said. Tell you what. Eat your fill. We've got plenty in the kitchen for all your little slave friends. Save your shirt. I'll make sure everyone gets their share. More than you have here. Luffy perked up at that. Can you make sure Ace gets some too? Ace, my brother. Luffy reminded him impatiently. How could everyone keep forgetting him? The one that I was sad about cause he lied about starting the fire. Ah, right. Him too then. But will you do me a favor in return, Luffy? Another one? What is it? Will you keep me company while you eat? If you don't mind too much. I'm surrounded by those gruff guards. Young perspectives like yours are always refreshing. Luffy nodded. He could do that. He didn't really want to. The man was kind of weird. He would rather go back and show Sabo, who was worrying about him, all of the food he had. But he figured it must suck to get stuck with all those mean guards all day. Luffy would be lonely too if they were the only ones he had to talk to. Luffy sat at the table with him, listening to him talk while he ate. He was only partially listening to what the guy said. He really loved that mother of his. He would have done anything for her. Too bad she wasn't a better role model for him. Where is he anyway? Luffy asked, his mouth full of food. The constant chatter stopped, and the room was filled with silence. It took a long moment for the man to answer. He's with his mother. They're far away from me right now. Oh, Luffy figured that was kind of sad. He knew what it was like to miss your family. What about you? You're awfully young to be here. Where are your parents? Don't got any. He stuffed a roll into his face, struggling to close his mouth around it. Oh, what's happened to them? Dunno, I just don't have any. Are they dead? I don't really know, Luffy said again. I don't think so. They probably just didn't want me. The man leaned forwards in his chair a bit, anger flashing over his face. That's terrible. It's a parent's job to protect their children. If they can't do that, then well, they're not quite human, are they? I'm pretty sure they're human. Luffy figured he would know if they weren't. Then he would be part monsters, like a dragon or a tiger or something. That would be cool. No, Gramps would have told him if he was some type of creature. Do you have any other family? Yeah, I told you I have my brothers. Oh, and my Gramps and our mountain bandit friends. And Makino, Shanks too, and Shanks' crew, and some of the villagers. The man stopped him before he could continue to ramble. Your parents walked out on you and your brothers. Oh, no, my brothers have different parents. But I guess theirs is kind of sucked too, or they're dead. So it's mostly just us. Oh, the man said with perfect understanding. So they're not your real family then? Luffy paused mid-bite, food in his mouth. Of course, they are. They were more his family than just about anyone. Of course, the man agreed easily. You seem very attached to them. I guess. Luffy hadn't really thought about it before. Do you still get lonely sometimes? Why are you asking me all this? Why do you care? Luffy looked down at the bread in his hands. He wanted to eat more. He was so hungry he could probably eat all the food on the ship. But he wanted to make sure there was enough for everyone. Even if this guy said they could have more. He pushed the piece into his pocket with the others. Just curious, he admitted. It sounds like you have had a hard life. Not really. Luffy's life had been fun. Well, aside from being captured as a slave. I guess sometimes. Especially lately when they took Ace. What if you never had to feel that way again? For the rest of your life? Would you want that? Did he mean that Ace was going to come back? That no one would try to separate the three of them again? Luffy nodded. Something seemed to light up in the man's eyes, and for a moment he looked genuinely happy. Luffy didn't like it. Well, Luffy, I think we might be able to help each other. How? The man waved off his questions. All in good time. Are you done? Luffy nodded, pocketing the rest of the food on his plate. Can we go get the rest of it for everyone? Oh, right. It's too much for you to carry yourself. I will get someone to hand it out in a bit, okay? Okay, just don't forget K. Some of them are really hungry. One of the guards took Luffy back to his cell. Sabo was gone when he got back, but the guard said he was just working, and they would bring him back at the end of his shift. Most of the others were gone too, but the nice lady Rose in the cell beside him was sick, so they had left her behind. Luffy gave her the bread so she could pass it down to the cells beside her. You're such a sweet thing, she said, patting his head. If more people were like you, the world would be a better place. Luffy just smiled up at her. He didn't know about that, but he was glad he could help out a nice lady who didn't deserve to be here. But she didn't keep any of the food he gave her and instead passed it all down to further cells, telling the remaining slaves who weren't at work to try and de-spread it as much as they could down the cell block. Aren't you hungry? She smiled at him. I'm fine, little one. They said they will come give us more food. You can eat then. She didn't say anything, but Luffy knew she didn't believe him that they were going to bring more food. She was right. The food never came. 30. Sabo moved Ace's leg to the side as gently as he could so he could work on his face. You really are a mess. He was rubbing a damp dishcloth over the other's face, trying to remove some of the blood and grime that caked his skin. As it was, Ace looked like a demon with streaks of bloodied soot covering most of him. They were back in the kitchen, grabbing supplies and weapons. They had to be careful not to linger here too long or someone might discover them. Ace was sitting on the counter while Sabo stood next to him, trying his best to patch him up. He felt Ace tense beneath his fingers when the cloth pressed against a still healing injury. Sorry. As it was, Sabo couldn't even see where the damage was. I can't understand how you're still standing. The more layers of soot he wiped away, the more he realized what rough shape his brother was in. And that meant something coming from him. I'm fine, Ace told him. No, you're not, Sabo sighed. None of them were fine. He put his palm on his brother's face, gently urging him to look up at him. Ace, I'm so sorry I couldn't stop them from taking you away. I'm sorry I wasn't watching Luffy better that night. I'm sorry he got so hungry that he passed out in the first place. I am sorry I let them take him away, and I am so fucking sorry I couldn't help you more. I'm just... Ace was staring at him with wide eyes now, and suddenly Sabo couldn't deal with the look those sad gray eyes were giving him. He turned away. I'm just sorry. Sabo finished, his eyes burning as he looked at the floor. He shut them before they got the chance to start watering. God, after all of this crying in front of Ace, who had been to hell and back for him, would be so embarrassing. But more than that, it was pointless. What was that going to accomplish? Crying about it was not going to undo anything or bring Luffy back. God, it was not going to bring Luffy back. His hand was still on Ace's cheek. When he tried to move it, Ace stopped him, grabbing his wrist to hold it in place. He leaned into the other's touch ever so slightly. He waited until Sabo looked at him again. It took a moment, but he was patient. Sabo, none of us would still be here without you. So honestly, save it for someone who gives a fuck outlook. The exact same thing he said the last time Sabo tried to apologize to him. He knew Ace didn't hold him responsible, nor was he interested in his apology. I wish it mattered, Sabo told him quietly. I wish my regret could mean something. But all of those thoughts that kept him awake at night, haunting his waking life, affected every action he took. They meant nothing. Not to their situation. It was weird to think about, but some of the greatest catastrophes in life could be avoided by a handful of people taking responsibility and seeking repatriation. But Sabo was not one of those people whose regret would change anything. Why was it always that the people who felt bad, who wished to change things, were the same people whose actions were utterly pointless? He didn't know. It matters, Ace promised him. It matters to me, okay? You're not someone who should be apologizing for how things ended up. But you are, because no one else is, and that's just who you are. And that matters. I promise I'll show you that one day. Sabo pulled his hand free, continuing to patch his brother up without a word. We need to get Luffy back. These pirates, what do you know about them? Rose seemed to think highly of them. I don't think they are the type of people to kill slaves just for the fun of it. They might not know Luffy is a slave. I don't think they would kill kids either. That's a big assumption you're going on, Ace told him, and Sabo sighed. I know. He remembered the way that man had held Rose's cold hand. He had a hard time imagining those same hands lashing out at Luffy for the sake of hurting him. Then again, what did he know? People were complex. You met them right. What do you think? Ace frowned. They tried to bring me with them. They didn't hurt me when they could have. But I have no clue what they wanted me for. They said they wanted to help me, but he shrugged. That's what everyone says. I honestly can't tell you anything other than they're strong as hell, and I don't trust them with Luffy. Ace didn't trust Luffy with anyone. Sabo had spent most of his childhood watching Ace develop those protective instincts that come with being an older brother and one of the ones responsible for a person, especially someone as accident-prone as Luffy. All of that was only cemented in their heads by their current situation. So Sabo understood what Ace was feeling perfectly. We'll get him back, he promised. We'll fix whatever's wrong with him. He had to remember them, he just had to. Sabo could fix it. He would find some way to remind him. There was that crushing feeling again. It was all for nothing. Everything was for nothing. Sabo had a lot of things taken away from him in his life. But the time they had spent with Luffy since he was 7 years old, somebody somehow had taken that away from them. But that didn't matter right now. Not when so much was at stake. He helped Sabo down from the counter. They had raided the knife rack and dozens of blades were piled on the counter. They weren't ideal, but it would have to do. Sabo tucked a few into the waistband of his pants, hiding a few more under his clothes just to be sure they wouldn't be caught defenseless. Ace did the same. Sabo looked at him doubtfully. Maybe you should stay here. You are really injured. Sabo didn't want Ace passing out on him during a fight. We both know I'm not going to do that. Yeah, I know. It will be fine. Listen, Sabo, I know I've done a real shit job of it lately. He cut off the other one when he tried to disagree. But I am going to take care of you too, I promise. No matter what it takes. That was what scared him. I know you will, Sabo told him. Ace would always watch out for them, and Sabo would always watch out for Ace. God knows Ace wouldn't protect himself. 30. There were a lot of guards on the lower levels of the ship. It was dark down here and the air smelled damp. Luffy had never been here before. He had never been a lot of places on the ship, but he was glad he hadn't spent a lot of time here. It was miserable. A lot of the guards were dead in the hallways. Luffy recognized some of them. He didn't like a single one of them. They were always mean to him and something in their eyes scared him. Plus, whenever he met them it was usually because they were hunting him down to bring him back home. But he never wished them dead. This was what Thatch had tried to warn him about. When Luffy froze, the captain had simply grabbed him around the middle and kept moving. Like nothing happened. He only set him down when they reached the room with all of the surviving guards. Thank God, Cap. What are we going to do? Barricade the door. The man commanded. Shake yourselves off and get ready for a fight. The pirate scum isn't far behind me. He knelt down beside Luffy, grabbing his trembling arms. Luffy, are you okay? Luffy looked up at him, his eyes big. Why is everyone dead? Pirates, the man spat. The friends of that man you defended so harshly. He was going to do the same to you. Luffy shook his head. No, Thatch wouldn't do that. He promised they wouldn't kill me. The man laughed humorlessly. They're pirates, Luffy, they lie. You are naive still. This is why you must obey me. Luffy remembered the faces of one of the guards. He looked scared. He felt tears well up in his eyes. Are we going to die? He tightened his grip on Luffy's arms. Do you remember what I told you when we first met? Luffy shook his head. No, I suppose you wouldn't remember. Well, I asked you if you had the chance to never feel lonely again for the rest of your life. Would you want to take it? You did what? And you agreed to it, so I am going to keep that promise. For however long or short the rest of your life you won't be alone. He was starting to scare Luffy. He pulled back. The man didn't let go of him. Lonely. He was always freaking lonely. That was why he ran away so much. Whatever promise he had agreed to. There was no way Luffy had wanted this. He had wanted to go with Thatch so badly. To see the ocean and the stars. Now he was going to die with the same crushing lonely feeling he always had. And suddenly everything was too much for him. Screw his promises. He twisted his head back, sinking his teeth in the hands that held his shoulders. The man let go, yelling in surprise, and Luffy bolted. Grab him. He heard the trampling feet as the guards chased him, but he didn't stop. He wanted to get out of here, go far, far away from here. And he wouldn't stop running until he was free. It was never much of a chase. The guards blocked Luffy's path and the captain caught up easily. He grabbed his upper arm once again, hauling him along. All of Luffy's struggling amounted to little more than squirming as he roughly pulled him back to the center of the room. He was furious. Luffy knew that much. But the man had bigger issues at the moment. I want a blockade set up in the hallway. The captain was barking orders left and right, his hand never loosening on Luffy's arm. I want everyone left armed and ready to defend this spot. We will kill these pirates or we will die trying to understand. Luffy didn't like the sound of that. He clawed at the hand holding him, only for the furious gaze to turn onto him. Let go, he told the angry man. The captain's gaze turned murderous. I should have killed that pirate when I had the chance. No, Luffy protested as he tried to twist away. Yes, the man spat, his eyes ablaze with fury and something darker. After all, what good is my word if you don't keep your promises? You're nothing but a liar. I thought after all this time I would have taught you better. If your pirate or any one of those miserable beings tries coming through those doors, we will kill every last one of them. No, Luffy yelled again, feeling anger mix against his own fear and frustration. He didn't really understand how things or anything really worked. But he didn't think the pirates were bad people. At least not Thatch or Marco. Maybe the captain was right. Maybe they were going to kill him. But that couldn't be, because Thatch and Marco had promised him that they wouldn't. They told him their captain would be disappointed in them if anyone hurt him, and Luffy learned from this crew that people tended to listen to the captain. Why does anyone have to die? He said. Thatch is nice. I bet if you talk to him you guys can stop fighting. Maybe they were all just really hungry. Luffy sure was. And everyone was being stupid cause they missed breakfast. So if they could just stop, then maybe the fighting would stop. Maybe Luffy didn't have to be alone anymore. Maybe he wouldn't have to die. But however logical his solution seemed to him, it infuriated the captain. The man turned his now full attention to Luffy, crouching down to grip both of his shoulders tightly, forcing Luffy to look into his furious face. You stupid boy, how can I make you understand? In this world, the strong reside over the weak. That's natural. The strong eat the weak. And we are the strong. We are greater than the slaves, and we are more than those worthless criminal invaders. I saved you from that, but you are just like the rest of them, aren't you? Too narrow-minded to see the whole picture. Oh, he yelled in pain as Luffy twisted around to bite his arm. He latched on with his teeth, holding on for dear life as the man tried to dislodge him. He closed his eyes as he felt the man begin to attack him. A good shake caused him to gasp, his teeth pulling free of the bleeding flesh of the forearm. He felt himself be thrown to the ground and his head smacked against the cool stone. He lay there dazed for a moment as the captain towered over him. You'll regret that, the captain promised. You'll regret disobedience. Captain, one of the men called him. The pirates are here. They're trying to break down the barricade. Hold, the man commanded. Get into defensive positions. That barricade comes down on your life. Yes, sir. The man turned back to Luffy, who pulled himself up from the ground. He had seen him angry before, but never this angry, at least from what he could remember. Luffy thought the captain would attack him. He was prone to violence, but instead, he shook his head as if Luffy had disappointed him. I gave you everything. I saved your life. You were living in filth before me. Luffy had no idea what any of that meant. You were lonely and hungry and neglected. I took care of all of that for you, and I asked in return was your obedience. Why can't you listen to a simple request? Would you rather death? Yes, Luffy decided. He wasn't happy here, so whatever the alternative was, he would take his chances. There was a banging from the other side of the barricade that caught everyone's attention. It could mean only one thing. The pirates were here, and they were pissed. The noise was nearly ear-shattering. With every bang, the entire ship seemed to tremble under the force of the pirates on the other side. The only thing keeping it up was a handful of guards pushing back against the piled crates and rubble with all of their might. Luffy wanted to run again, but the captain wouldn't let him go. He was holding his wrist so tightly that it was already bruising. Luffy turned his attention back to the door. Luffy, there it was again. Someone was calling for him on the other side of the barricade. It was faint, but he could hear it. The problem was so could the captain. Luffy felt his steel grip tighten. Hang on, Luffy. We're going to come get you. Thatch, Luffy yelled at the top of his lungs. Help me, oh. His scream was interrupted as the captain backhanded him viciously. Shut up. The man snarled. I'm your guardian, not him. Not anyone else. I know what's best for you, got it? And I would rather let you die than suffer at their hands. Luffy was still squirming when the captain reached over to grab his throat. Not enough to cut off his airway, but enough to scare Luffy. Don't. Luffy moved his grip to claw at the intruding hands. He had never been all that good at holding his tongue. That was what got him into so much trouble in the first place. But right now all of that fell away, and he had nothing in his head but the truth. I'm tired of listening to you. You're mean and stupid, and you always lock me up and hurt me. He wrapped his tiny hands around the captain's much larger one, meeting the bloodthirsty eyes. I want to go with them. I don't care if I die, just as long as it's not with you. They stared at each other for a long, intense moment. The expression the captain was wearing before was nothing to the one he had on now. Luffy had a hard time recognizing it, but he thought that maybe the man's eyes. They looked like he was already dead. Luffy shivered as the hands tightened around his neck. Aside from the constant banging on the other side of the barricade, the room had gone silent. Even the guards looked uncomfortable as they subtly edged away. Those who had heard him looked terrified, and the others picked up on the tense atmosphere that had enveloped everything. Finally, the captain spoke, and unlike before, his voice was quiet, practically a whisper. I thought I could make you understand. He told him, I thought those boys you were with had put bad ideas in your head. If you could just forget them and everything idiotic-minded people had taught you, then you could understand. I thought you might see it my way, but you never did. Understand what? Luffy asked. Who put what in my head? That's still them talking. He barked out a laugh, an eerie sound that echoed throughout the room. I took you away from them to save you. I met Blondie once. He came to kill me. He was dirty and beaten and starving and covered in dirt and completely overpowered, but he gave me this look while they were dragging him away. It's the same one you would give me, the one you're wearing right now. His look on your face. What is it? Pity, disgust. You are looking down on me. You have nothing and yet you pity me. Luffy had no clue what he was talking about. But then again, he never did. Listen to me, the captain told him. If those boys aren't dead by now, they soon will be. The pirates are probably ripping them apart as we speak. I wish I could have seen your face, but I guess it's useless now. You wouldn't recognize them, but somehow you're still looking at me like they did. Let me go, Luffy told him. He was tired of this ramble. The captain shook his head. I will, he promised. Just one more time first. You're too disobedient even after everything. Just once more and you can be done. Luffy yelled as he felt the man's hands move to his forehead. He felt one hand stroke his hair in silent reassurance, but the next second both of the man's palms closed around Luffy's temples and Luffy was screaming again. It hurt. His head was on fire. It felt like lightning was running between the captain's hands through his head. Everything else was temporarily forgotten. Even the sound of the now splintering barricade was nothing but background noise to Luffy's screams. It only lasted a second, but it felt like so much longer, and his head went blank. Blank like a cloud. He had felt this before. It really hurt. There was something in his head, driving away all of his thoughts, digging around in everything between his ears and eviscerating it until nothing was left, just an empty head, full of clouds. Something was different about it this time. Luffy had seriously pissed him off. He wouldn't stop with an empty head right now. No, he was after everything. The captain was in his head, and in that second his intentions were clear. The man was furious, and rejected, and lonely, and betrayed by Luffy. He was going to fry his head until Luffy couldn't think, or speak, or do anything. At least that's what the man intended. Then there was a loud bang, and all of the captain's intentions turned to a singular feeling: pain. and then the lightning was gone and Luffy was left standing, his legs barely able to hold him up as he swayed. His head was fuzzy, processing everything at speeds slower than an inch an hour. He looked down at the captain laying on the ground beside Luffy. The man was cursing and spitting in anger as he sat up, clutching one of his hands to his chest. Bright red was flowing freely from his hand onto his clothes. Luffy blinked at it, tilting his head in confusion. He knew what that was. It was bad. They were in danger. Blood. The man's hand was bleeding and he was screaming cusses in anger, but the noise was lost on Luffy as if he was listening to everything from underwater. The captain moved his hand and Luffy could see there was something wrong with it. There was a space where a finger should be, but there was only red blood. Red like the dead guards in the hallway. Luffy groaned at the memory and the captain turned to look at him. Their eyes met for a second and then the man's attention was quickly drawn by the encroaching threat. "You," he snarled as his unbloodied hand reached into his jacket for the gun Luffy knew was concealed there. But he had hardly begun drawing it when a dark shape shot past Luffy so fast his eyes couldn't track it. In seconds the captain was knocked flat on his back, the speedy blur on top of him. Luffy blinked stupidly. It wasn't a blur, it was a creature, like a monster, covered in soot and dirt in strips of cloth. It was snarling and Luffy could see its teeth. He drew in a sharp breath as the two of them tumbled back onto the ground, the captain's hand still clutching the gun, but the creature had pinned it to the floor. "Shoot him!" The captain screamed at the guards. "Kill him!" But the guards were busy holding up the remnant of the barricade, which came down to several wooden barrels. The rest had been shattered or discarded from the force of the blows on the other side of the wall. Several of them began to move to come to the aid of their captain, even at the cost of maintaining the barrier. But before they got the chance, there was a loud reverberating sound of a second gunshot and the room froze. The captain was among the frozen as the second bullet launched itself into the wooden floor, a mere inch away from his head. A voice from behind Luffy warned. It was cold, mercilessly so. "If any of you so much as move, I'll put a bullet through his brain. Do you understand?" No one moved. "Tell your men to stand down unless you want these to be your last moments." Luffy's movements were still slow, but he forced his body to listen to his head as he clumsily looked over his shoulder at the person with a gun. His vision was blurry, but he could make out the newcomer. It wasn't one of the guards. No one Luffy had ever seen before. He looked a lot younger than the rest of them. Luffy knew this because he was so short and thin compared to everyone else. He was dirty too and a little shaky on his feet, but his hands clutched the gun without so much as a tremor. When he noticed Luffy's gaze, his eyes softened when he saw him and his lips moved. It took Luffy a second to realize that, while his hearing was off right now, the boy's lips were moving to form words without making a sound. "Hang on." Luffy looked at the captain, still laying on the floor. The creature crouched on all fours over it, its bandage-wrapped hand still holding the gun to the ground. "Tell your men not to move." The boy with the gun snapped again. "Or the next shot is your head." From behind them, there came a tremendous smash against the barricade and the sound of snapping wood. "Captain, they're breaking through." The man screamed. "Any minute now." The captain never broke eye contact with the newcomer. "I should have killed you months ago," he said. The blonde didn't so much as blink. "Last warning. Stand down, men," the captain growled. "Maintain the barricade, everyone. Those pirates will be the death of all of us." The crew members shuffled to do just that, clearly unnerved by the situation. "Let go of the gun," the boy continued. Reluctantly, the man's grip loosened on the gun, his free hand instead of going to clutch the bloody one. Luffy watched the black-haired monster take it from him, tucking it into what Luffy had thought was its pelt but was actually just ragged shorts. Luffy's own vision was pretty blurry and getting worse. He turned his gaze down at the wooden floor below him. He watched as a bead of red dripped down, spattering against the wood. It was quickly followed by another and another, the third staining his shirt as it fell. He was bleeding. Had the scary kid shot him too? He reached up to his shaking hand to his nose. He was bleeding, not just from his nose but his ears as well. That made sense since he was pretty sure the dumb captain had popped his brain like a balloon. "Lou," the boy was saying. He sounded worried. "What the hell did you do to him?" The monster was looking at him now, staring. Luffy took one look into the gray eyes and felt his legs finally give under him. "Luffy, Ace, let him go." But now, Luffy lay on the floor, his vision swimming in and out of focus as he watched as the monster reluctantly got off of the captain. "Don't move an inch or I really will shoot you," the kid warned the man. Luffy whined as the monster came to kneel beside him. He expected it to attack him as it had the captain, but it just raised its hand, an oddly human-like one, to Luffy's cheek. "It's okay, Lou," it told him. "Just breathe. We've got you." He whined again as he felt hands work underneath him, lifting him up against the dirt-covered monster. The captain was laughing again. "Look at him. He's terrified of you too." "Undo it," the blonde snapped, pointing the gun for emphasis. "Undo what?" "Whatever you did to him." The captain was laughing again, and the last barrel splintered as it was caught between the crew holding it in place and the thudding of the locked door. Like a heartbeat it hammered against the men. Abandoning the last of the barricade, they threw themselves against the door, even as it groaned at the force of the combined weight of the pirates on the other side. "They will be in here any second," the captain said. "We're all dead now anyway." "I don't care," the boy screamed to be heard above the noise. "Undo it." The captain was laughing again, the same chillingly hollow sound. "You won't shoot me," he told the boy, "because you think I can fix him. Well, I've got news for you too. There's no undoing it, there's no making it better. You're too late. He stopped crying for you months ago." Luffy felt the monster's arms tighten around him as the room came into clearer focus as he slowly began to come back from the edge of shock. "Sabo," the monster spoke again, its voice low and sad. "Kill him." The kid shook his head. "Please," he whispered. "Change him back." "I can't," the captain said, "even if I wanted to." "Why?" the boy asked, his voice still a whisper. "Why did you take him?" "I was saving him," the captain told them. "From your fate. You should be thanking me. I fed him, I kept him safe. I cared for him. He was happy with me." The boy shook his head. "Luffy wasn't happy." "How would you know?" "I just know." "Sabo, shoot him," the monster growled. And then multiple things happened at once. There was a loud bang as the gun went off, and a thunderous splintering sound as at last the entrance to the room caved away, finally granting the pirates access. Through the fresh rubble stepped the familiar pirate, the one who had taken a look at Luffy, Marco, the rest of his crew behind him as he surveyed the collection of surviving guards. His scanning eyes eventually landed on the captain's crumpled form lying piteously on the ground. The blonde kid's gun was still smoking from a shot that seemed to have disappeared entirely. "So you're the one responsible for taking Rose away from us and killing all those innocent people?" To Sabo he said, "I understand, but I can't let him get off that easily, can we?" "Halt," one of the crew members cried, drawing their weapons. "You have no business here." "No business," one of the pirates on the man's right said, stepping forwards. "That's amusing. We're pirates, we go where we choose. And you took our friend from us, so we're going to take your lives. Every last one of you. Kill them," the captain snarled from the ground, sounding less authoritative and more like a whiny child. "Show no mercy." "Took the words right out of my mouth," the pirate said as Thatch stepped up beside him to survey the damage. His searching eyes found Luffy's, and relief washed over his tense face. "Hold on," he said just as the crew opened fire. The room was suddenly set in motion. Fire seemed to crawl out of the walls as gunfire and swords were drawn. When a stray bullet ricocheted into the floor inches from the monster's bare feet, it swore. It ducked down, covering both of them from the spare bullets. And that was when Luffy decided his first plan was his best. The haze slowly clearing from his mind, he squirmed and struggled and bit at his captor. "Hey Lou, stop." Luffy felt himself be dropped the last foot onto the wooden floor. "Shit, sorry." The monster tried to grab him back, but Luffy was quicker. He pushed himself from all fours onto his feet as he ran a few shaky steps. "Wait, don't." The monster reached after him, but adrenaline fueled Luffy on, forcing him to push past his dizzy and cloudy mind to make it those last few feet into the cluster of crates piled near the back corner. He was wiggling his way between them when the monster caught up. It grabbed his ankle, attempting to pull him back. He squeaked in surprise, digging his fingernails into the wood below, trying to hold on with all his might. Enough was enough already. "Thatch!" Luffy screamed. With a harsh yank, the monster pulled him free of his hiding place and dragged him back into its clutches, just in time for the angry pirate to reach them. Fighting was taking place all around them, but Luffy could only focus on one thing at a time, so he chose his friend's face. Right about now he would be okay with the hand-holding offer, even if it was for babies. "You okay, kid?" The monster was holding him against its chest. Its grip only tightened at Thatch's words. "My head hurts," Luffy told him, his tongue sluggishly tripping over the vowels. "You and me both," Thatch said, his tone light but his face serious as he regarded them. "Hang tight, okay?" To the monster, he said, "So you are the other one Marco told me about." The creature growled. "Look, kid, I don't want to fight and you're not looking so good yourself. Just let go of the little guy, okay? I don't know if you want revenge against his father or what, but he's just a little boy. He's not his goddamn father." The monster snarled and Luffy yelped as its arms tightened on his bruised ribs. Both it and Thatch noticed, and to Luffy's surprise the grip loosened almost apologetically. "Okay, we can talk about it. Just let him go and come with us. We don't want to hurt any of you." "I'd rather take my chances jumping into the ocean," it snarled. All around them the fighting seemed to be winding down. It hadn't been a very challenging struggle by any means. The residents of the ship were poorly outmatched by the pirates. One of Thatch's friends came over to try and help, but Thatch waved them back. "He has a knife," he said under his breath. The pirate hung back, looking unsure about the whole situation. "What's your name, kid?" "Shut up," the monster told him. "Well then, you don't really want anyone to get hurt, do you? I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But we can talk this out. We mean you no harm. Then let us go." "We can't do that," Thatch said. "We're burning this whole ship to the ground." "I'll take my chances," it said again, and Thatch sighed. "We can talk, just hand over Luo's shit." Thatch and the other pirate were forced to duck as a bullet fired upon both of them, drawing everyone's attention to the shooter. The blonde boy from before had redirected his aim away from the captain towards Thatch. "Leave them alone," he yelled, firing again. Marco," Thatch said as they were forced back further by the attack. It was a short-lived assault as Marco was beside the blonde boy in an instant, knocking the gun away from him while simultaneously pushing him to the ground. The monster screamed in panic as he started towards them, temporarily dropping Luffy. Luffy fell onto his feet, willing his knees to hold his weight as he stumbled forwards once more towards Thatch. "Luffy, no." The monster reached after him, but all he managed was to catch a fistful of air as Luffy ducked his hand, running straight for Thatch and the safety he had promised. The man bent down to catch Luffy, hugging him tightly. Luffy felt the arms close around him and turned around to see if it was following them. To his surprise, the monster wasn't much of a monster. Now that his head was a bit clearer, and his eyes weren't so blurry, the big scary creature just looked like a human. A young and skinny human who was dirty and injured. Unlike before, it hadn't chased him. Instead, it was standing in the same spot, an odd expression on its face. He looked stunned and unfathomably sad. "Why?" it asked Luffy, and he didn't have an answer. The boy looked back at the blonde behind him, now being held back from them, and something seemed to snap inside him. "Oh God," Thatch said as he charged the man. He quickly pushed Luffy to the side to catch the other as he slammed into him. "It's okay," Thatch promised, fighting to restrain him to give the second pirate an opening. They moved quickly, and the other lashed out with a powerful but not debilitating attack on the near-frantic boy. The blow hit the back of his neck, and all the fight faded out of him. He crumpled into Thatch's waiting arms. "It's okay," Thatch said as he shifted the boy's unconscious weight. Luffy had no idea if he was talking to the kid or him or the blonde boy across the room, who was now screaming bloody murder in Marco's arms. "No, Ace, ACCA, let me go." "Calm down," Marco commanded. "He's all right, just unconscious." Luffy watched the whole scene unfold around him. The guards had mostly surrendered by now. Some had managed to escape, but he didn't think they would make it very far. These guys seemed really motivated. He looked back at the monster boy in Thatch's arms. Was he? Luffy's knees gave out at last, and he crumpled back to the floor. Thatch looked at him sharply. "Luffy, here." He tried to hand off the boy to the other pirate, who reluctantly took him. "The last time I held him, it didn't go too well." "It's fine, he's sleeping," Thatch said as he went to go check on Luffy. He put his hand on his forehead and then the top of his head. "You hanging in there, bud? Is it dead?" Luffy's voice was thin as he stared at the monster boy. "Huh?" Thatch followed his look. "He's just sleeping," he repeated. Luffy's gaze shifted from the black-haired boy to the other one. He watched helplessly from Marco's securing arms as his friend was carried away. He seemed to be calming down, the same sad expression on his face as he watched them go past. The captain was laughing now, sitting on the ground behind them, clutching his bleeding finger and laughing at them, at their desperation. The blonde boy's fist tightened in the folds of the other's shirt as if seeking comfort. "No, not comfort." The boy caught Luffy's eye as his hand tightened around the handle of Marco's gun. They stared at each other for a single second before Marco realized what his true goal was. But it was already too late. Luffy watched with a delayed reaction as he found the man's gun, drawing it quicker than the blink of an eye. He tore his gaze away from Luffy to whirl around to the captain. Marco reached for the gun, but he wasn't fast enough. There was a loud bang, and the captain was knocked onto his back. The laughing was gone, replaced by dead silence. Marco grabbed the gun away, swearing as he did so. "Oh shit," Thatch said again as he tried to shield Luffy from the grisly sight of the man laying on the floor. Luffy felt darkness overtake his vision as his eyes rolled up to the ceiling and he fell into nothingness. Sabo watched his brothers be carried away with a horrible feeling in his heart. He tried to break free of the man's hold, but it was pointless. Hey, it's okay," Marco kept telling him over and over as he tried to struggle. "No," Sabo screamed as the last pirate passed, carrying Luffy out of his sight. "Let me go," he screamed, drawing most of the attention. "It's okay," the man was still saying as Sabo finally slumped into his arms, exhausted. He was on the verge of passing out himself. He wasn't healthy enough to be putting up this much fight, but he couldn't just stand here. Not after his brothers had been taken away from him once more. While he watched, unable to help them once again. He had failed them again. "You've calmed down?" Marco asked. Sabo met his sleepy eyes with his own, and when he spoke his voice was hoarse from screaming. "Why?" The man didn't answer, instead looking down at the dead pirate at their feet. Marco frowned. "We aren't going to get any answers out of him now, are we?" He sighed. "That's too bad. He sure went the easy way out, didn't he? Compared to everything he's done." Sabo was staring at the pirate, desperation in his eyes. "What are you going to do to them?" "Huh?" Marco looked over his shoulder. "Those two boys. I have no idea." As for the surviving crew, he looked out over the slavers that were still conscious. They didn't look nearly as mighty now, tied up and completely surrounded. They seemed to shrink back from his piercing gaze. "We're going to kill them," Any objections? A couple months ago, Sabo wanted nothing more than for all of them to burn. But right now, he didn't care. He was running out of things he still cared about. And me? He asked. What are we going to do with you? Marco asked him. We've got questions, and now you're the only one who can answer them. So, you need to come to talk to our captain. After that is anyone's guess. Do you have any family? Sabo closed his eyes, trying to get a hold of himself. He couldn't come apart not like this. When he opened them, Marco was staring at him. He met his gaze evenly, knowing the pirate could see the way his eyes threatened to swim. His next words were clear as he wanted the pirate to know that he meant every word. Go to hell, he said. Marco sighed. Sabo didn't go willingly with them, but he also wasn't attacking them, so Marco didn't question it. The kid almost fell over when Marco let go, so he kept a firm grip on his arm as he led him through the underbelly of the ship and back to the deck. The only time he tried to struggle was when Marco asked him to climb the rope ladder back onto their temporary ship. But the rebellion was brief and the fire died out in the boy's eyes as quickly as it had come. Frankly, Marco was worried about him, but it would have to wait. They had larger concerns. Namely, the only thing this incredibly bloody rescue mission had accomplished was saving 2 slaves who absolutely loathed the Whitebeards and the captain's son who couldn't tell them a thing, and whose father had just been murdered in front of him. Not to mention the near overwhelming weight of the hollow Rose had left. Marco hadn't been able to go more than a couple seconds without thinking about her, how he had failed her. The arrangements that would need to be made. What heroes they turned out to be. He left Sabo in one of the spare bedrooms. It was small due to the size of the ship, but it was big enough for a small cot and a nightstand in the corner. Get some rest, Marco told him as the blonde boy looked around the room, his face unreadable. When Marco let go of his arm, the teenager all but fell onto the bed, clearly exhausted. We'll talk tomorrow when you're up for it, Marco promised him. As much as I don't want to, I'm going to lock you in tonight. Sabo had proved himself to be a wild card between attacking them, the captain, and then them. If you need anything or want to be let out, just bang on the door. We'll come to get you. If not, I'll come back in a few hours in the morning, all right? The teenager didn't say anything. Not that he expected him to. Sabo listened, Marco told him, and the sad blue eyes looked up to him. I know things seem bad right now, but just hold on. We're not going to hurt you, all right? Did you hurt them? The blonde cut him off. What? Where are they? Who? Sabo was back on his feet again, gathering whatever energy he had left. The other 2 boys, both of them had black hair. One my age, the other a bit younger. Where are they? Oh, Marco blinked. Your friend is in the infirmary. He's really worn down and malnourished. We're giving him fluids and an IV. He probably is going to be out for a while. The blonde sat back on the bed when his legs failed. He was still staring intently at Marco, although his expression was less angry. Is he okay? Marco nodded. He will be, with lots of rest and nutrients. He's seriously starving. You both are. You are going to need calorie-controlled meal plans for a little while. The boy huffed in annoyance. I don't care about that. When is he going to wake up? It's hard to say, Marco said. It all depends on him, really. And how badly he's injured. Sabo nodded, processing it. And the other one? I don't know if I should tell you, Marco said. Your buddy did try to attack him. That's not what he was doing. Sabo snapped. Oh, the blonde turned his head to glare at the floor, once again electing not to share what he knew. Luffy's okay, Marco told him. He's doing better than your friend. He had a temperature and possible signs of a concussion. The kid nodded, looking down at the floor once again. Can I see them? He finally asked, his voice quiet. I don't know if that's such a good idea right now, Marco said. We'll talk about it tomorrow. Get some rest. 30. After he left the blonde, Marco met Aizu on the deck for an update. They stood in silence for a moment, looking at the hulking form of the former slave ship. So much was lost there, none of which could be reclaimed. And all for the unquenchable greed of the nobles. It made Marco sick. Most of all, it made him think of Rose. Everyone's off it, he asked, and Aizu nodded. We swept it twice. No other slaves survived. Burn it, Marco said as he turned away. Gladly. He went to the nurse's quarter next. Several of his crewmates had been injured in the following battle and they were being treated, although it was mostly for minor things. No serious injuries had been gotten. The thing about slavers was they were always so weak. He met Thatch there. His brother was helping out, kind as always. He had made food for his injured ship brothers and was doling it out. He smiled as Marco walked in. Is the slave ship taken care of? It will be in a couple minutes, Marco said. Rotten wood always took longer to burn. How's Luffy? Thatch's smile fell a little bit. Let's go check on him, all right. He put down the tray, navigating across the room to the nurse's office. It was a small shoebox room full of supplies, a desk, and a couch. They had put Luffy there to try and keep him away from the noise and commotion. He was looking better, or at least a little better than he had been an hour ago. His face was still pale and his eyes had this strange, disconnected look, but he had woken up. Thatch sat down next to his feet, patting his knee to get his attention. Hey, buddy. Luffy's big eyes moved over to the man's face as he stared at them. They had cleaned the blood from his nose and ears, and one of the nurses had taped an ice pack on his forehead for the fever. You feeling better? Thatch asked. Luffy nodded, trying to sit up, but Thatch gently pushed him back down. Stay there. We still don't know what happened to you, Marco. And the nurses had taken a look at him when they brought him in here. It was really hard to say. It almost seemed like someone had electrocuted his head. But there were no marks. He also had signs of a concussion and mild brain swelling of one area, thus the bleeding from his ears and nose. But again, there were no marks outside. They needed to get back to the ship to run some tests. Since waking up, Luffy had been out of it and scatterbrained. Although he seemed to be getting a bit better the more time passed. The color was coming back into his face, and he was more alert than he had been. Thatch left to go grab something from the kitchen, and Marco took his place, sitting by Luffy's feet. He moved the ice pack to feel the child's forehead. Do you remember me? He asked. Luffy's eyes followed him. Thatch's friend, he said after a moment. Marco nodded. And my name is. Luffy frowned. Pineapple. That was unexpected. Marco couldn't tell if it was Luffy's failing memory or honestly his usual one. Marco, he said. And you are? Luffy tilted his head, thinking about it. Leviathan, he said after a moment. Really? You think that? I guess not. But that would be cool. You're close with the owl, Marco said. Luffy finished for him, looking pleased with himself that he got it. Leviathan cooler though. Can we change it? You're definitely feeling better, Marco told him. But I'm worried about your memory. Whatever happened to you is affecting it again. My memory's fine, Luffy said. Sure, Marco said. Can you do something for me? Luffy nodded. Or he tried to before remembering how much his head hurt. Get some more rest, little guy. Thatch came back a moment later with a big mug of tea. He placed it on Luffy's stomach, waiting until the kid gripped it with both hands. This will make you feel better, he promised. "'Kay." Luffy tightened his grip on the mug. Are you doing okay, Luffy? My head hurts, Luffy said again. Yeah, I meant about everything. That started almost hesitantly. I know that all had to be pretty scary. Luffy frowned, and Marco noticed his little fingers tightening around the mug. I'm glad I didn't die, he said after a moment. I really thought I would. I'm sorry about your dad, Thatch said. If that really was your father, then I'm sorry for multiple reasons. But you shouldn't have seen that. Luffy just pressed his fingers into the mug handle, following the curve of it. That guy sucked, he decided. I didn't really want him to die. But I guess stuff just happens. He was like really mean too, and I'm glad I don't have to listen to him anymore. For what it's worth, Marco said, I can promise you one thing. No one is going to hurt you wherever you end up. I swear on our flag you will be safe with us, okay? Luffy smiled at him, showing his teeth. Shit. Okay, he said. After they left to let Luffy sleep, Marco checked on the third boy. He was in worse shape than the other two. Hospital bound for the time being. He was fast asleep on one of the beds in the back. A nurse had hooked up an IV to try and get his nutrient levels back as fast as possible. Until then, it was anyone's guess how long he would be out. If possible, he looked even younger, and more injured here than he did on the ship. The nurses had bandaged the worst of his injuries, but the bruises were still visible on his sun-starved skin. Jozu said they locked him up in a room without light. Thatch told him, looking down at him. Marco nodded. They had found some of the others. They hadn't survived. This kid is a fighter, I can tell. Why? Thatch said as he leaned over to squeeze the kid's hand before putting it back at his side. I want to know why the slave traders would do this. Why did only these two survive? Without the captain, those answers are going to be hard to get, Marco said. They had questioned the crew before the ship went up in flames, but they had learned very little, and Marco was inclined to believe that the men honestly didn't know other than their captain received a call and gave out the command to begin getting rid of their cargo. Even after all these years on the sea, the depths of human depravity never failed to amaze him. We'll figure it out, he promised. For now, guessing won't do us any good. When he is up to it, I have some questions for Sabo. I think he knows more than he is letting on. 30. The ship's atmosphere was grim. Usually, after a battle the pirates were boisterous, but right now there was absolutely nothing to celebrate. Rose was gone, they had just burned a ship. And on board countless atrocities happened. Despite their best intentions, they had only managed to save 3 people, 2 of which seemed to want to take their chance swimming back to land. All round it was hard to find things to be grateful for. Luffy was completely oblivious to this when he woke up for the second time. His eyes clearer and his actions more energetic. He still had a fever, so Marco made him keep the ice pack on his forehead. But he was doing considerably better, even walking around the nurses' quarters when he got too antsy to keep sitting in one place. Thatch had spent most of the night helping to prepare all their siblings' dinner after the battle. But when the food had been doled out, Thatch finally had the chance to sit down himself and eat something. He brought Luffy with him and bullied both Marco and Aizu into joining him, as he knew his brothers well enough to know they hadn't touched food yet. Luffy dug into the food happily, hardly waiting for Thatch to stick a fork in his hand before he started in. He seems to be doing better, Izu said. The group of them sat at the small cook's table in the corner of the already dwarfed kitchen of their ship. I still don't know what the captain did to him, Marco said. I'm not sure I can undo it. Whatever it was, poor little guy. Luffy did not seem to think he was poor as he went after the bowl of soup, all but ignoring their conversation. Thatch frowned at the speed he tore through the food. I'm not sure you should be eating it that quick, he told him. Why don't we take a break? When Luffy didn't answer, Thatch moved to take the bowl only to be met with a loud growl. Luffy had growled at him like a dog when someone touched their food, teeth bared and everything. The first sign of aggression any of the pirates had seen from the friendly little boy. Thatch let go in surprise, all of them staring at him. Luffy grabbed the bowl back, not bothering with the fork this time as he dove back in. After a moment the pirates erupted into laughter. Damn, Izu said. I guess not. Fine, Thatch said, giving up. But if you make yourself sick, it's on you. Luffy finished the bowl, putting it down on the table to turn back to Thatch. His eyes were pleading, like a begging puppy. Oh, now you're all doe-eyed, huh? Thatch said. New buddy Marco. Marco slid over his untouched bowl and Luffy dove back in, attacking it with the ferocity of a wolf once more. Kid can eat, huh? Well, I guess now if he gets sick it's on you, Thatch said, giving up. Luffy begged for more, but when he didn't get it, he fell asleep on the table moments later and Thatch carried him to bed, putting him in one of the unused closet-like rooms. Thanks for the yummy food. Luffy blinked up at him when Thatch put him down on the bed. It was really good. Now you're all flattery, huh? Thatch teased him. Who taught you your table manners? A pack of wolves? Luffy agreed, and Thatch didn't know if he was kidding or not. He tucked the little kid in, patting his hair reassuringly. Listen, Luffy, I know everything seems like a lot right now, but it's going to be better tomorrow. You'll see. Luffy stared at him. Can you stay? He asked, catching the man off guard. Sure, bud. Thatch stayed until Luffy fell asleep, which only took a couple of moments. When the boy's breathing evened out, Thatch readjusted the ice pack on his head before heading out, locking the door behind him. 30. Help. Help me. Sabo banged on the door relentlessly until one of the pirates came and opened it for him. Damn it, kid, what? You sound like you're dying. Fearful now, Sabo took a step back. I just wanted some water. Didn't someone give you some? Sabo shook his head, eyes innocent. The man sighed. Okay, kid, come on. He followed him out the door, down the corridors. Partway there, Sabo got dizzy, and when he tripped, the pirate stumbled to catch him. Easy there, the man said, sliding him down a wall. I'll go get a nurse. Sabo grabbed his sleeve. No, I'm okay. I promise. I just need sleep. The pirate hauled him to his feet as they went back to the room. If you start to feel sick, let me know. Okay. If I don't answer, I've probably fallen asleep. Just hit louder. Sabo nodded, having no intention of listening. When the door shut once more, the blonde retrieved a shard of broken glass from under the bed from his previous water glass. He wrapped it in a scrap of fabric and a makeshift knife, hiding it in his waistband. He waited what felt like hours until the footsteps outside slowed, and then went silent altogether before unlocking the door himself. He had stolen a couple needles and a matchbook from the man's pocket when he had pretended to stumble. Sabo had enough training with picking a lock from his childhood, even in the dark with his shaking hands. When he opened the door, the silence of the ship greeted him. Barefoot, Sabo started down the corridor, feeling his way along in the darkness. He didn't dare light a match, but he managed all the same. After so many months on the slave ship, Sabo had gotten good at getting by in the dark. He went to the infirmary first, having passed it on his way in here. Most of its earlier occupants had left, leaving only several pirates with serious injuries, all of them sleeping deeply. Sabo crept by the beds, sticking close to the wall. He spotted a nurse in the office, the light of her desk showing the pages of the medical book she was intently reading. Rose. She had probably done that. Sabo shook his head. This was no time for survivor's guilt. Not when there was so much still at stake. He continued to the back room, where he found his brother. Ace looked awful, although Sabo had seen him worse. An IV was stuck in his arm, and he looked deathly pale, not even stirring when Sabo tried to shake him. Ace, he called the other as loudly as he dared before swearing. He could have used his help, but that was fine. It looked like the pirates hadn't lied when they said they would treat him. His skin had been cleaned of much of the grim and dirt that caked him, and snow-white bandages covered the worst of the abrasion. Sabo slipped his hand into Ace's bandaged one, giving it a squeeze. I'll fix this, he promised. You'll see. I won't fail you guys this time. Leaving Ace there for the time being, Sabo backtracked, heading back to the part of the ship that had the tiny shoebox rooms as opposed to the bunks where the rest of the pirates were. Most of the rooms were empty. Those that weren't held, sleeping pirates. Sabo risked opening 2 of the doors before he decided it wasn't worth checking them all. He moved down the hallway, finding one of them locked. This one, Sabo couldn't explain how he knew. He just did. He set to work on the lock until the handle turned easily in his hand. Lighting one of the matches, he crept inside, closing it behind him. Luffy was sleeping in the bed, looking pale and banged up, but overall okay. The ice pack on his head had slipped during his tossing around. The pirates had kept their word on both accounts. Luffy was safe for now, but how long their goodwill would last, or what they wanted them for, was anyone's guess. Sabo moved to sit on the edge of the bed, shaking Luffy's shoulders until the little boy groaned, rubbing his eyes clumsily. Now that they were alone, Sabo risked lighting the candle by his bed so dim light could flicker across the room. Luffy said, halfway between a question and a whine as he sat up, sleepy eyes turning to Sabo, looking very much the same as when he got woken up too early. Unable to help himself, Sabo pulled the younger boy into a tight hug. I'm glad you're okay, he told him. Who are you? Ouch. Sabo let him go, feeling like Luffy had burned him. That was basically what he had been expecting, but still ouch. That was never going to stop hurting. Would it? Not even a little. You don't remember me? He asked, and Luffy shook his head. Try really hard, okay, Lou? Luffy shook his head. What were they going to do about any of this? His earlier question returned. I can't fix this. No, since when was he the one to give up? But first things first. Pushing aside his worry, Sabo smiled at Luffy again. I'm your friend, he told him. We're friends, okay. He knew his brother well enough to expect the glimmer of excitement in his eyes as he nodded. Okay. Luffy loved making friends. Sabo got off the bed, lifting Luffy down as well as he offered the other his hand. I want to show you something, yeah. Luffy hesitated, only for a moment. Good to see the stranger danger Sabo had tried to teach him all his life had really paid off before the small hand slipped in his slightly larger one. Okay. They walked down the corridor, holding the other tightly as they went. Sabo took Luffy back to the room the pirates had locked him in, unsure of where else would be safer. He debated trying to hide from them in the storage room but quickly decided against it. There was no point if they were stuck on the ship. The pirates would eventually find them, and then things could be made worse. He had to fight back a sigh as he sat down on the bed again, motioning for Luffy to follow. The little kid did, although reluctantly. He looked around the tiny room. Do you live here? Sabo shook his head, feeling exhaustion creeping upon him. No, Lou. Luffy reminded him. Right, Luffy, this was going to take some getting used to. Not that he wanted that. Sabo's head hurt too much for any of this, and he was having a hard time focusing on anything. He was going to pass out soon. Today had been too much. Way too much. He should make some more weapons, or maybe defenses, check on Ace again and try to wake the other up. Maybe explore the ship or see if there was a map he could steal. Just thinking about it made him fall back against the bed, making a frustrated sound. Luffy copied him, flopping back on the bed with a giggle. He sat up to do it again, bouncing against it and then again. Energetic as always. He never let me do this, Luffy said between bounces. Oh right, and then there was that. He's not your dad, Lou. Luffy, you know that right? Luffy nodded as he paused for the moment, turning to look at Sabo. I know. They're just words. What is? Everything, the thing people say. It's like lying but they don't know it. Stuff like dad, and keep you safe, and love. People say them a lot, but just because you say it doesn't mean it's true. If they really meant it, they wouldn't have to say it. He shook his head. People talk too much. Yeah, Sabo mused. God, they don't they? He groaned as he looked up to the ceiling. Everyone was a liar. Luffy was staring at him now. He could see his big eyes, the gears working behind them. What? You're sad, Luffy said. Sabo didn't bother trying to deny it. What difference would it make? Luffy would be able to tell. He could always tell the words from reality. Don't be sad. He wasn't doing it on purpose. Sabo was just really tired. Bone-achingly exhausted. Everything was tiring now. Just waking up in the morning was so damn draining. Lou, if I tell you something, do you promise not to tell anyone? Luffy nodded, angered by his weakness, but past caring. Sabo said, You're right. I am really sad, and I don't think I'm all right. He turned his head away as Luffy patted his forehead clumsily. You're just hungry, he said. So, you're upset. I get upset when my stomach is empty too. You'll feel better later, okay? And of course, you are okay. We'll be fine. Pushing his hand away, Sabo met the serious eyes. How do you do that? How are you always so hopeful? Why wouldn't I be? I got to leave that place. I got fed double dinner and Thatch said I get double breakfast tomorrow. So that's good. Remembering himself, Luffy smiled. You're okay too. We both are. We're still here, right? The pirates aren't bad, I can tell. When Sabo looked doubtful, he continued. Things will get better. I know it. You just need to hang on. Sabo had been hanging on all this time. That was what he was sick of. He always marveled at Luffy's optimism and ability to trust. What if the pirates aren't who you think? Sabo finally said. I'll protect you, Luffy said. Oh, you will? Sabo asked him, smiling when Luffy nodded. Even without Luffy, he was still so Luffy-like. It was a little strange. Can you come here? Sabo asked. Luffy hesitated for a moment before he pushed closer, moving slowly, so as to give him plenty of time to push him away. Sabo moved closer as well, wrapping his arms around the younger boy as he pulled him to lie down. Are you okay? Luffy nodded, his hair moving against Sabo's cheek. The old Luffy was used to this, but now he was probably used to sleeping alone. Sabo couldn't help but wonder how long Luffy had spent yelling for one of them to come and save him until he either realized no one was coming for him or his memories of them faded. "I'm so sorry." "For what?" Luffy asked. "Everything. You're weird," Luffy told him with his usual tact. "But it's SK. Lu, promise me you aren't going anywhere again," Sabo said as he felt the dark cloud that had been threatening to overtake him for hours finally creep upon him. Before he could hear the answer, Sabo passed out. For the first time in a long time, it was a peaceful sleep, and he knew that when he woke up he wouldn't be alone. Luffy was gone. His bed was empty. The door had been picked from the outside. Thatch had woken up earlier than the rest of his siblings to get started on breakfast. He had intended to check on Luffy, only to find out that the brother Marco had assigned to watch over him was fast asleep outside. After the long battle, Thatch had basically expected that. It wasn't until he tried Luffy's door that his heart began to pound. It stopped altogether when he realized that the kid wasn't there. He was dead. Thatch had killed him with gross negligence. Hands trembling, Thatch woke up his sleeping brother, who in turn ran off to get Marco, recognizing the catastrophe for what it was, something for their brother to deal with. Thatch was searching the kitchen when Marco caught up to him. "He's dead." "He's not dead," Marco told him. "He probably just got bored and picked the lock from the outside." Marco didn't reply. "What?" "Sabo," he said, and Thatch paled, feeling his stomach churn with the very real promise of revisiting last night's dinner. No, Thatch muttered as he turned back to the halls, brushing off his brother when he tried to catch him. "He was locked in too," Marco reasoned as he followed behind. "You thought Sabo might try to kill Luffy because of his dad," Thatch replied, his words ringing in his own ears. His stomach gave another twist. No. Why hadn't he planned ahead? Why hadn't he kept his guard up? Why the hell did he trust guard duty to their clearly exhausted little brother? Why didn't Marco say something? Thatch's brain was spiraling with worst-case scenarios. Finding Luffy hurt, finding him too late, not finding him at all. "We'll find him," Marco said, unless there was nothing left to find. Both men fell silent, their thoughts going to the worst-case scenario. So many things could have been done to prevent this, to protect the happy little kid who had trusted them. But after the excitement of the battle, it honestly hadn't really crossed their minds that either of the slaves would go this far to know. Thatch whispered what he could remember of a protection prayer under his breath as they went, asking all the unearthly deities that might be listening to keep Luffy safe. The ex-slave's door had been picked as well. There were identical scratch marks on the exterior side of the lock. Sabo had jimmied it open and then closed again behind him. Just like with Luffy's door, even Marco had nothing to say to that. Both men stared at the door handle in horror. Thatch had expected Sabo to be gone, although he had no clue where to, since they were trapped on a boat. But when Marco unlocked the door, they were surprised to find him right where they left him. Sabo was sleeping on his side with his back to them, his head pillowed on his arm. He didn't so much as stir at the creaking of the door, completely ignorant to the world. He had been out though. Thatch could tell from his blackened feet and the makeshift lockpick kit on the bedside table. Thatch could practically see it. The boy slipping out of his room in the darkness, heading to Luffy's room. The kid never had any chance against him. Not when his father had stolen this boy's future, the future of his cellmates. He probably thought the murder was justified if it meant getting back at the captain. After all, Sabo had the stomach to kill. They had seen that yesterday when he took out the captain without so much as flinching. He had hatred for that man, and he wasn't afraid to act on it. It would have been easy to toss Luffy over the railing. The entire crime would probably take 10 minutes tops. Undetectable, unprovable, no one around to hear Luffy's cries for help. Thatch was going to be sick and then possibly throw himself over the ledge maybe at the same time. Besides him, Marco was silent, observing the room. The bed first, then the sleeping figure of the kid. Thatch figured he had reached the same conclusion, only he didn't look broken up about it. Rather, Marco waved. Luffy's messy hair peeked above Sabo's shoulder. He leaned over the other boy to wave back. Thatch's knee gave out on him about the same time. He hit the floor with an umph despite Marco's supporting hand. "I forgot you couldn't sense him," he said apologetically. Thatch was honestly too relieved to hold a grudge about it. Sabo stirred at the noise, pressing his face further into his arm with a half whine. His body had shielded the younger boy from sight, at least from Thatch's viewpoint. Mostly awake now, Luffy was rubbing his eye, one hand on the other boy's shoulder to brace himself. Since when did these two get along? "Good morning," Marco told him. Luffy agreed, yawning widely. "Early. I know," Marco said. "Thatch was just worried about you. You good buddy?" Luffy nodded. "How's the head?" The ice pack had slid off some time in the night, but Luffy did look better now. He didn't look so pale anymore and he seemed a little more responsive. Maybe whatever that man had done to him was wearing off. Marco hoped so. Luffy nodded with a sleepy acknowledgement. He looked down at Thatch and frowned. "Are you okay?" "Yeah," Thatch said, finding his voice again. "You just scared me when I couldn't find you." Oh, Luffy clearly didn't understand Thatch's concern at all. He crawled over the boy, clumsily kicking him in the head in the process, which finally woke him up. Sabo sat up suddenly, remembering where he was as he looked around. He looked scared, his eyes falling on Luffy, who was sitting on the edge of the bed, his legs kicking off the edge. He slumped back down in relief. "Morning to you too," Marco said, blue eyes fixed on the two men. He didn't say anything, and the silence stretched on uncomfortably. "What did you get up to last night?" The boy gestured to the contraband on the bedside table. "You can take it." Marco followed his gaze but didn't move. Both of them knew it wouldn't matter. Sabo was resourceful. He would replace whatever they confiscated. He probably already had a backup plan. "You met Luffy then?" Thatch asked, his heart refusing to calm down from the near scare. He was too old for this, damn it. Sabo didn't say anything, and Marco sighed, gesturing for Luffy to join them. When the kid tried to hop down, the blonde caught his wrist, pulling him back. His gaze never left the men's faces. "Come on," Marco said as Luffy pulled his arm free. "I know it's early, but you two must be hungry." "I'll make whatever you want," Thatch promised. "Second breakfast," Luffy whispered in wonder. Thatch winked at him. The blonde's face was as cold as it had been since holding the captain at gunpoint. "What do you want with us?" he asked. "What did you want with Luffy?" Marco countered. "You must have gone through a lot of trouble to find him." "I was making sure he was okay," the teenager said. "I didn't know what you guys were going to do." "They're nice," Luffy told him happily. Then turning to the pirates, he said, "Sabo is nice too. Can we eat a bunch of breakfasts?" Thatch smiled at that. He believed Sabo. There was literally no other reason to spend so much effort picking all those locks and searching dozens of rooms in the dead of night. So apparently, they had misjudged the teen. He had just been trying to look out for the younger boy. And a good thing too, that could have been bad. Luffy hopped down, coming over at the promise of food. The blonde pushed himself to his knees shakily. "You should rest some more," Marco said, eyeing him. "I'll come to bring you food and we can do the checkup then." "No," Sabo said too quickly as he swung his legs over the side of the bed. "If Luffy goes, I go." "What do you think we are going to do?" "Kill him," Sabo said without a pause. "Or sell him." "Sell him to who?" Thatch said. "We're in the middle of the ocean. If we wanted to hurt either of you, we would have done it already," Marco told them. "We want to help." "For Rose." Sabo seemed to think about that. Luffy leaned over to pull on the boy's sleeve. "Told you, they're nice," he said. "Let's go get triple breakfast." "I thought it was double," Thatch said. "Quadruple," Luffy said. "Whatever you want, kid." "Same to you, Sabo. You can stick with the kid if that's what you want." "If that's okay with Luffy." Luffy nodded. "Yeah, we're friends, right?" Sabo turned to look at him, the hint of a smile on his lips. One Luffy returned wholeheartedly. "Let's go make hexadruple breakfast." 30. "I feel like you shouldn't be eating waffles so soon after starving," Thatch told the boys. "But whatever, you guys earned them. Just try not to overeat." "I'm looking at you, Luffy." "She," Luffy giggled, his tiny fingers never straying far from the pan Thatch was working over. He stayed close to the man's elbow as he cooked, waiting for his opportunity to snatch the food away. Marco grabbed him, taking him back to the table once again to sit in his seat beside the teenager. Sabo watched them but didn't say anything. In fact, he didn't say anything for a good long moment. He looked completely exhausted, sleep and pain clouding his eyes. Marco would have liked to give him a checkup, but every time he got too close the kid tensed. They would have to wait until he either conceded or passed out from exhaustion, whichever happened first. Luffy, on the other hand, was doing great. He was slowly but steadily shaking off whatever happened to him yesterday. He still felt a little bit hot, and sometimes he wobbled on his feet, but mainly he seemed okay and acting more and more like himself by the minute. These three kids were the single good thing to come out of this sickening mess. They hadn't deserved that, no living creature did, and Marco was glad they got them out. They had been so close to helping so many more. He sighed, sinking down to his own chair across the table. Sabo was staring at him through his sleepy eyes. Marco met his gaze, expecting the boy to turn away, but he didn't. "What?" he asked after a tense moment. "I'm sorry." "For which thing?" Behind him, he heard Thatch pause in cooking to look up at them. "For slamming you into a wall." A moment of silence passed, and the teenager made a noise as if debating if he was really sorry about that. "I'm sorry for slamming you into a wall when you were distracted with her." "That wasn't part of your master plan?" Marco asked, resting his chin on his palm. Sabo shook his head. "There was no plan. I saw a chance, and the rest of me just moved. But if someone did that to me..." He looked down at Luffy, who was happily kicking his feet on his chair, watching the waffles being made. "Sorry, I already said we aren't going to hurt you. That means taking revenge on you." He shook his head. "I'm not groveling. I am sorry for that, even if you end up killing us." "It's fine," Marco told him. "You had to do what you had to do to survive. I get that. And I would tell you we aren't going to kill you, but I don't think you would believe me." "Why would I?" Sabo shot back. "I don't know you." "Well, what would make you trust us?" His answer was immediate. "Let us go." "In the middle of the ocean. There is nowhere to go." "Then I guess not," he said. This is fun, Thatch said, interrupting their tense conversation by putting a waffle-laden plate down in between the two of them. You're stuck with us, kid, he said, relocating the top of the stack to Sabo's plate. For the foreseeable future, like it or not. So I guess you will just have to decide for yourself what our intentions are. Personally, I'm a chef, so I intend to make things and have people eat them. Sabo frowned but didn't respond. Besides him, Luffy excitedly tore into his plate like a rabid dog. The sounds of his happy chewing filled the tense silence. Sabo watched them for a moment longer before picking up his own fork. He broke off the corner of the dish, spearing it underneath the prongs. How long had it been since he used a fork, he wondered. How long since he had eaten hot, unexpired food? Probably not as long as it had been since someone had made him breakfast. Well, he guessed Ace had, before all of this, on the days he overslept and the two of them got hungry. But he didn't think that counted. It felt like a lifetime ago now. He didn't even know how long they had been on this ship. Was he still 15? Was Luffy still 12? He twisted the piece of waffle on his plate, deliberating before giving in to his hunger. His mouth watered around it, and for a second, he thought he had died back on that ship for something to taste like heaven. It tasted so good he could cry. How did it taste so good? Forgetting everything else, Sabo abandoned his fork and attacked the slice with his fingers. Hardly noticing his now sticky fingers, he tore it in half, finishing off the first piece without really chewing. The second piece was quick to follow. His stomach threatened to revolt, but he ignored the sensation. Like hell, he would allow his idiot organs to reject the first real food he had in months. He ate the second one, and then the third. Thatch was nice enough to slip both him and Luffy a fourth, but said that Sabo would have to wait to see if the food sat well in his stomach before he got any more. Nobody ever had, he realized. No one had ever made him breakfast before. At least not like this. Not with a kitchen and a recipe, and ingredients, and a plate just for him. Forever ago, the kitchen staff at his parents' house would prepare meals, in which he was expected and required to partake with perfect manners. Not that he ever really ate with his parents save for special occasions. But somehow it didn't feel like the same as this. His stomach twisted in warning again, stronger this time. Sabo stubbornly grabbed the last piece, shoving it in his mouth, fighting against the wave of nausea. He was not going to waste this. Not a single bite. Not when so many people had lost their lives because the guards couldn't spare so much as a table scrap for them, let alone make them breakfast. Rose deserved this. She was the one the pirates had wanted to take care of. He swallowed back a wave of bile that threatened to climb back up his throat. After the guards had taken his last brother away, Sabo was left completely on his own, with nothing to distract him from the crushing reality of his situation. Nothing except Rose. She had understood something on his face as he sat in his cell, day in and out, waiting for them to bring Luffy back, slowly losing hope each day he didn't reappear. Marco was watching him, his expression unreadable. "It's okay," he said. And there was something so understanding in his tone it made Sabo's already upset stomach churn. He turned his frown to his empty plate. The food had been more than he could have possibly hoped for, but he didn't want to tell them that. He didn't want to be in their debt either. "More," Luffy commanded, with all the entitlement of a noble ordering his personal chef around. "What did I just say, bud?" Thatch asked. Sabo was grateful the pirates seemed to take his brazenness with good humor for now at least. He couldn't get a read on them. "I'm hungry, Luffy," Sabo schooled him, his voice soft, but the warning was there. Or at least it would have been if Luffy understood or remembered what Sabo's cues were for reining him in were. His little brother looked up at him blankly. "You look exhausted," the pirate told Sabo. "Do you want some coffee?" He didn't respond, but Thatch poured him some, and some for Marco and himself. Luffy pushed over his now empty juice glass expectantly. "You too," Thatch laughed. Luffy nodded, and the man obliged him just a little. The three of them watched with no surprise whatsoever as he swallowed it, only to instantly spit it back into the glass. "It's sour. That's how it's supposed to taste," the man snickered. "He thinks hot chocolate and coffee are the same things," Sabo told them as he grabbed the handle of his cup. It had been a hot minute since Sabo had had coffee as well. Never had he appreciated it more than right now. It quelled his stomach, as well as fighting the exhaustion away. "Okay, kid," Marco said. Something in his voice had changed. Sabo looked up at him sharply. "You're it." "And what?" "Answers. Since the guards were basically useless, and you shot the captain, you and your friend are all we have to piece together what the hell happened. That's why you saved us," Sabo realized. Neither man said anything. "Sorry," Sabo said without missing a beat. "I can't help you." "And why's that?" "I don't know anything." "We both know that's not true," Marco said. "Why would I lie?" Sabo put the mug down, meeting their look head on. After what he had been through, these two didn't scare him. "That's a good question," Marco said. "Just tell us something, Sabo, anything." "Who are you?" Thatch cut in not unkindly. "Can you start with that?" "I'm nobody," Sabo said. "Just some orphan from the East Blue." "Any family?" "No one worth mentioning." "Which island?" Sabo looked down at his mug. He could hardly tell them that. Now when he was still holding out hope of going home one day. "And him," Marco gestured to Luffy. Who is he? Sabo didn't say anything, and the man continued. Now I'm thinking you know him. Yesterday, did you come down there for revenge or for Luffy? Sabo had slipped up with the hot chocolate line. He was still too tired to think straight. He shrugged. He didn't want to talk about this. Neither did Luffy. I don't know him, Luffy answered for Sabo. I'm bored. Let's go. One sec, bud, Thatch said. Luffy pushed his chair back so he could hop down, immediately starting to explore the kitchen. He had always been terrible at sitting still. Sabo watched him, wondering if he had been allowed to explore at all after the captain took him. He hoped so. Marco followed his gaze. Do you know what the captain actually did to him? Sabo shook his head. He had a devil fruit or something. Yeah, we know, Thatch said, rubbing his own forehead. Does it mess with someone's head or their memories? When I found Luffy, he could hardly tell me his own name. That got Sabo's attention. His eyes flashed as he looked up sharply. Remembering himself, he looked back at the table again. He clenched his hands. I don't know. Marco and Thatch shared a look, and Marco pushed a little bit further. Thatch said that Luffy was chained to the bed so he couldn't run away. Do you know why his father would do that? He's not his damn father, Sabo snapped, hitting the table with his fist before remembering himself. He sat back in his chair, staring down at his lap. Sorry, is there something you want to tell us? Thatch asked. Not unkindly. Sabo just shook his head. No, sir. Marco hit a sigh as Thatch shrugged. They had tried. Okay, I guess that's that then. Sabo nodded without looking up. He rose from the table, motioning for Luffy to follow him, then paused. Thanks for the food. Thatch smiled at him, and there was no pity or disgust in his look. Of course, buddy. Whenever you want. After breakfast, Sabo figured that the pirates would continue their interrogation. But they let the issue drop pretty easily, seemingly unbothered by Sabo's secrets. For now, at least, he figured it would come back up in the near future. He felt exhausted, his feet dragged against the wooden floor of the ship, and he felt every step vibrate up his frame. Sabo was not up for this right now. He felt as if he could sleep for a week if they let him. He had managed to stay out of the infirmary, but only as long as he didn't collapse. Luffy skipped ahead of him happily, keeping up with the pirate Thatch easily, as the man led them through the stubby halls of the ship. A few pirates glanced their way as they passed, and Sabo felt all of their stares pierce through him like knives, and his shoulders never failed to tense. But Thatch gave them easy smiles and they kept on their way, and that was that. He stopped in front of one of the doors, giving it a double knock. When no one answered, he risked sliding it open. Aizu cleared the showers for you guys earlier. You better hurry though. Shower? Sabo echoed, his brain struggling to keep up. You want us to shower? Yeah. No offense, Thatch told them. I was only on that ship a day and I still smell like charcoal, and what is that? He sniffed the air. Fish. Luffy giggled, and Thatch winked at him. No offense taken. Sabo was no stranger to smelling terrible. A childhood living in a garbage dump had seen to that. He had rinsed off in the bathroom yesterday, scrubbing as much of the dirt off his face and skin as he could before giving up. Being clean was the least of his concerns right now. If only his parents could see him now, they would have a heart attack. Can we go see the other slave? Thatch looked at him. You keep asking that. Is he a friend of yours? Sabo didn't flinch under the man's questioning stare. Please, he said after a minute. Thatch leaned against the bathroom door, considering. What's it worth to you? I told you, I have nothing for you, Sabo said, feeling too exhausted for all of this. Tell you what, I'll ask the nurse for you if you do something for me. Sabo eyed him wearily, taking a small step back, catching Luffy's arm in warning. Thatch made a face. Don't be gross. You can cool it with that look of yours. If you could light me on fire with a stare, I'd be ash by now. Just give me 5 honest answers, and I'll see what I can do about your friend. Oh, and take a shower first, yeah. Sabo shifted, thinking about it. He let go of Luffy's arm when he started to squirm in impatience. For his part, Luffy stepped back, looking around the darkened ship halls, clearly bored with the two of them. I smell fine, can I go? No, you don't, both of them told him at the same time, making Thatch grin at Sabo. See, same page. Fine, Sabo caved. 3 answers. Thatch nodded. I can work with 3. He tapped his chin thoughtfully. Real answers, that was the deal. How will you know if I'm lying or not? Sabo asked. The same way you'll know if I'm lying. You have to trust in me. Yeah, well, I don't have much of a choice, do I? Sabo asked, and he had a lot more to lose. Ready for the first one? Sabo nodded as Luffy groaned, clearly bored by their continued talking. Was that the first question? Luffy asked, rocking back and forth on the balls of his feet impatiently. No, Thatch told him. One is a tough one, really think about this. Sabo rolled his eyes. What's your guy's favorite colors? It was right then and there that Sabo decided the man might be an idiot. Are you serious? You said 3. Ooh, blue I guess. The pirate nodded as if mulling over the information. He pointed to Luffy. And this one? I don't know. Why don't you ask him? Because I asked you, Thatch said. Be honest. Sabo huffed, annoyed by all of this and desperately wanting to sleep. But first Ace. Red, I guess. Thatch looked down at Luffy. You like red, buddy? Luffy nodded enthusiastically. Well, that's one mystery solved. He looked at Sabo. Would you answer if I asked how you knew that? Is that one of your questions? Sabo asked. Do I get a goodwill freebie? This isn't a game. Sabo told him. Fine. Keep your secrets. This one, so serious, right? He told Luffy, and the kid grinned broadly. She, Sabo always looks like. Luffy tried to copy Sabo's worried face, using his hands to push back his cheeks into a stern expression. Sabo rubbed his temple, feeling a headache forming from them. You guys deserve each other. And not that it mattered, but he used to be fun, damn it. Before all of this, Luffy would know that if. What's your next question? Thatch thought again. What were you actually doing in the hull yesterday? Did you come to kill the captain? Or, we went there to save Luffy, Sabo answered softly, meeting Luffy's curious eyes. Thatch said once again as he mulled his answer over. Aren't you going to ask why? Sabo said as the silence stretched on long enough to make him nervous. No, Thatch decided. I guess if you don't want to tell me, you don't have to. In time, I hope. But I have a better use of my questions. Tell me about Rose. What was she like when you knew her? Sabo cast his eyes down. Another thing he didn't want to talk about. But he owed them this. She was amazing, he told the pirate, and he smiled. She was kind to everyone. And brave. I would try to sneak her extra food and she never took it. She always tried to make sure everyone else got some instead. That was probably how they lost her the hunger. I'm sorry I couldn't save her. Sabo looked down at the floor, feeling his stomach curl unpleasantly at the thought. Rose deserved to live. Kid, Thatch's voice was soft, and there was no hint of his usual humor. That's so not on you, all right. We should have saved her. She was our sister, our responsibility. Do you understand? Sabo nodded reluctantly, allowing his eyes to meet Thatch's. Yeah, he said softly. Good. Thatch nodded. You two go shower. I'll talk to the nurse, okay? The man turned to leave, but Sabo stopped him. Anytime, he said softly. I'll tell you anything you want about her anytime, okay? The pirate's infectious grin was back. Thanks, kid. Sabo nodded, tugging Luffy with him as he disappeared into the bathroom. He thought about ducking out while Thatch was gone, about exploring the ship, going to see Ace on his own, but he decided against it. He would almost certainly get caught, and there would be other chances. Besides, right now a shower sounded too tempting. He bolted the door behind him, looking around the tiny room. Come on, he told his little brother as he started with the button of his shirt. We should hurry. You're no fun, Luffy told him, happily poking around the room. Sabo frowned. I am too. Luffy shrugged, clearly not believing him. Once again Sabo was struck with the ever-present feeling of wrongness of how unfair this all was. Okay, I'll tell you a story, yeah. And you can see how boring I am. Luffy perked up a little at that. Is it a boring story? You tell me. The two finished undressing, leaving their clothes in a little pile in the corner of the room as they made their way to the showers against the other wall. The pirates had left one of the shelves stocked with cloths and soap, which made Sabo hesitate, only for a moment. He didn't know if they were allowed to use any of this stuff, or what the penalty was, but he was so tired of asking for permission to do everything. One time, a couple of years ago, he started, as Luffy turned one of the showers on, splashing the water happily. Me and my brothers were hunting in the mountains, and we saw a tiger. Luffy leaned forward, suddenly very interested as Sabo came to sit by him. And my stupid older brother dared me to ride it. Did you do it? Sabo nodded, and once again Luffy smiled. I tried. It threw me off and nearly ate me. My stupid pain in the ass older brother had to throw a rock at its head to get it to let go of my leg. He still had the scar. Wow, Luffy said happily, sitting back. Sabo leaned back as well, enjoying the feeling of clean water against his skin, washing away all the dirt and grim he had been forced to carry with him. He scrubbed hard on his face and hands, trying to get rid of all of the black flecks underneath his fingernails. At this point, he would probably never be clean again, but this was a start. I guess you were cool, his little brother lamented, and Sabo felt compelled to tell him that throughout that entire time Luffy had been acting as bait to lure the tiger. He had looked so stupid, zigzagging through the woods, carrying a giant deer leg above his head. Not their brightest moment, but it had been fun. Back when they were still allowed to be stupid kids. I'm just trying to look out for us, Sabo told him. Luffy thought about it. You said you wanted to save me the other day. Thanks. You don't need to thank me, Sabo told him. Luffy thought about that for a moment, before taking the cloth, moving behind Sabo so he could wash the other's back. Oh, thanks, Sabo said as he sat up a little straighter. Amen, Luffy agreed happily. We're friends. Sabo nodded. Friends was fine with him. Better than strangers. They finished washing up, then they dried off and redressed. Luffy found a toothbrush in the back of the supply closet that they took turns using, and Sabo tried his luck at trimming back both of their hair, which had gotten a little shaggy during their confinement. Feeling better than he had in a long time, the two of them met Thatch outside when he knocked. "Hey, you guys," he greeted, looking the two of them over. "Have you seen two dirty boys? I think they went this way." Luffy went down the hall to look for the boys, the joke flying right over his head. "You're not funny," Sabo told him, and Thatch grinned. "Come on," the pirate smiled. "You want to see your friend, right?" Picking up the pace, Sabo followed him, motioning for Luffy to do the same. Nurse said 30 minutes only, then back to bed with you guys. "Thank you," Sabo told him. "No problem, kid. It's Ace, right? That's the boy's name." Sabo nodded slowly. "Yeah, anything you want to tell us about him?" "He's going to freak out when he wakes up," Sabo frowned. That was why he wanted to be there, to try and calm his brother down. It would be easier if Luffy was there too. Luffy was right. Sabo wasn't fun anymore. He was probably going to get frown lines from all this worrying. "We can handle his freakout," Thatch told him. "You kids don't really scare us." "If you say so," Sabo muttered as Thatch dropped them off at the sick bay. Sabo knew where to go. He had been here just last night, but he forced himself to wait for the nurse to instead show him where his brother was. As soon as she stepped away, Sabo moved to sit on the edge of Ace's bed, taking in the progress. Ace looked very much the same, still out cold, with a tube in his arm and a little clip thing on his finger. He let out a sigh of relief, looking over his shoulder for his other brother. Luffy was standing in the doorway, staring at them. Sabo frowned, gesturing him over. To his surprise, Luffy shook his head. Thatch had lingered in the room as well, clearly seeing that Luffy was not as excited at the idea as Sabo was. "Why doesn't Luffy come with me?" he offered. "He can help me get started on dinner for everyone." "That sounds like a lot of work," Luffy frowned. "No," Sabo insisted, getting off the bed. "He's fine." He grabbed Luffy's arm, guiding him back over to the bed. He was lucky Luffy didn't like either of his options, or he would have tried to leave. "This is Ace," Sabo told him, wanting to put this in terms Luffy would understand. "My friend." Luffy blinked up at him. "Luffy," Thatch asked, "you coming, bud?" "Will you stay?" Sabo asked him. "Keep me company." "I don't think your friend likes me," Luffy told him. "Course he does," Sabo promised. "If he's my friend, and you're my friend, then that means you guys are friends, right?" Applied Luffy logic at its finest. Did Sabo know how to outsmart his brother or what? "I guess." Luffy came a bit closer, poking Ace's cheek with his finger. "Luffy," Thatch asked. "Please," Sabo pushed. Luffy nodded. "Okay." Thatch shrugged, looking a bit unsure as he left. But Luffy had made up his mind as he sat down next to Sabo. "Why did your friend attack me?" "That's not what he was doing," Sabo told him. "He tried to save you." "Why?" Sabo sighed. He didn't want to have to think about Luffy not remembering who they were. All he wanted to think about was that all three of them were together again. That was all that mattered. Finally, he picked up Ace's hand, holding it in his own, feeling the warmth of the other, the brother that actually knew him. "Hey, both of us want to protect you. I don't need people to protect me. I'd rather die than have to sit in a room all day or get stuck in a box. Safe is really boring." "No, just no lure, Luffy. That, what he did, isn't protecting you. It's controlling you. They're not the same thing, okay? Even if he pretended, they were. They're both just words," Luffy told him, clearly having gotten lost early in the explanation. "How's it any different?" Sabo wanted to explain it. He really did. But his headache was back, and he couldn't think of a way without sounding like a hypocrite. Wanting to keep Luffy safe after that hell wasn't wrong. He knew that, even at the expense of his brother's boredom. But how did he explain that when he did it, it was okay? "It's not for you, it's for me," Sabo decided. "Like now, I wanted you to keep my company, even though you don't want to. But you did." He smiled at Luffy. "Let's keep it at that, okay? If the pirates get mean, you said you'll protect me, right?" Luffy nodded. "And if my friend tries to attack you again, I'll protect you." Luffy nodded, as this was slowly making sense to him. "And if I, or anyone ever tries to chain you up so you can't leave, tell me and I'll beat them up, "K?" Luffy smiled at him. "Okay," he agreed, liking the concept of not having to go back to captivity. "I wish we were friends sooner," he giggled again. "You could have saved me." Smile gone, Sabo looked down at the white bedspread beneath him, his grip tightening on Ace's. He didn't know what to say. "Would you ever forgive me if I let you down?" "Course," was Luffy's easygoing answer. And that was that. Sabo brushed his thumb past his little brother's cheek, forever amazed by him. "I really missed you, Lou. You're still really weird, Sabo," he laughed. He spent the rest of the time reteaching Luffy how to play tic-tac-toe, their made-up game that they used to play in their cell every night, with Rose watching them and occasionally laughing at how terrible Luffy was. It was stupid and pointless, but it bothered Sabo that Luffy didn't know how anymore. It was odd, the type of things that got to him right now of all times. But for whatever reason, that was on the top of the list. The nurse kicked them out eventually, and Sabo dragged his feet as he tried to find excuses to stay with his brother until she promised he could come back tomorrow. Little did she know, he would undoubtedly be back again tonight. Thatch took them back to their rooms as he had promised, trying to convince Luffy to go back to the room Sabo found him in. But before Sabo could even open his mouth, Luffy answered for him. "I'm staying near him," he explained to Thatch. "Oh yeah, Why's that? 'Cause Sabo gets scared at night, Luffy explained to the other's horror. I don't, he said, feeling his face heat up. You did last night, Luffy told him. Sabo looked down at the ground, clearly embarrassed. Well, why don't you guys go lay down? I'll come get you for dinner. I'm not tired, Luffy whined. Thatch said. You can help me. I'll let you eat the scraps. Luffy looked excited at the idea. He opened his mouth to accept, then seemed to think better of it. No, he shook his head, faking a yawn. I'm really tired too. He beamed up at Sabo. And the older boy returned the look with a small smile, patting his head. Thanks, Luffy nodded. We're friends, right? Right, Shishi. Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed the video, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification. So when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.